The great bell of Beaulieu was ringing. Far away through the forest might be heard its musical clangor and swell. Peat cutters on Blackdown and fishers upon the EXE heard the distant throbbing rising and falling upon the sultry summer air. It was a common sound in those parts, as common as the chatter of the jays and the booming of the bittern. Yet the fishers and the peasants raised their heads and looked questions at each other, for the Angelus had already gone and Vespers was still far off. Why should the great bell of Beaulieu toll when the shadows were neither short nor long? All round the abbey the monks were trooping in. Under the long green-paved avenues of gnarled oaks and of lichened beeches the white-robed brothers gathered to the sound. From the vineyard and the vine-press, from the Bouverie or ox farm, from the marl-pits and sultans, even from the distant ironworks of Soli and the outlying grange of St. Leonard's, they had all turned their steps homewards. It had been no sudden call. A swift messenger had the night before sped round to the outlying dependencies of the abbey, and had left the summons for every monk to be back in the cloisters by the 3rd hour after noontide. So urgent a message had not been issued within the memory of old lay brother Athanasius, who had cleaned the abbey knocker since the year after the Battle of Bannockburn. A long, straggling troop bore spades and mattocks, while the two rearmost of all staggered along under a huge basket of fresh-caught carp. For the morrow was Friday, and there were 50 platters to be filled, and as many sturdy trenchmen behind them. Of all the throng there was scarce one who was not labour-stained and weary, for Abbot Berghurst was a hard man to himself and to others. Meanwhile, in the broad and lofty chamber set apart for occasions of import, the abbot himself was pacing impatiently backwards and forwards, with his long white nervous hands clasped in front of him. His thin, thought-worn features and sunken, haggard cheeks bespoke one who had indeed beaten down the inner foe whom every man must face, but had none the less suffered sorely in the contest. In crushing his passions, he had well-nigh crushed himself. Yet, frail as was his person, there gleamed out ever and anon from under his drooping brows a flash of fierce energy, which recalled to men's minds that he came of a fighting stock, and that even now his twin brother, Sir Bartholomew Berghurst, was one of the most famous of those stern warriors who had planted the cross of St. George before the gates of Paris. With lips compressed and clouded brow, he strode up and down the oaken floor, the very genius and impersonation of asceticism, while the great bell still thundered and clanged above his head. At last the uproar died away in 3 last, measured throbs, and ere their echo had ceased, the abbot struck a small gong which summoned a lay brother to his presence. "Have the brethren come?" he asked, in the Anglo-French dialect used in religious houses. "They are here," the other answered, with his eyes cast down and his hands crossed upon his chest. 32 of the seniors and 15 of the novices, most holy father. Brother Mark of the Spicarium is sore smitten with a fever and could not come. He said that. The lay brother stood meek and silent, with his arms still crossed in front of him. 1,000 Aves and as many Credos, said standing with arms outstretched before the shrine of the Virgin, may help thee to remember that the Creator had given us 2 ears and but 1 mouth, as a token that there is twice the work for the one as for the other. Where is the master of the novices? He is without, most holy Father. Send him hither. The sandaled feet clattered over the wooden floor, and the iron-bound door creaked upon its hinges. In a few moments it opened again to admit a short, square monk with a heavy, composed face and an authoritative manner. "You have sent for me, Holy Father." "Yes, Brother Jerome. I wish that this matter be disposed of with as little scandal as may be, and yet it is needful that the example should be a public one." The abbot spoke in Latin now, as a language which was more fitted by its age and solemnity to convey the thoughts of 2 high dignitaries of the order. "Woman, woman," groaned the abbot, well as the holy Chrysostom termed them radix malorum. "From Eve downwards, what good hath come from any of them? Who brings a plaint? It is Brother Ambrose, a holy and devout young man, a light and a pattern to every novice. Let the matter be brought to an issue, then according to our old-time monastic habit. Bid the chancellor and the sub-chancellor lead in the brothers according to age, together with Brother John, the accused, and Brother Ambrose, the accuser. And the novices, let them bide in the north alley of the cloisters. Stay, bid the sub-chancellor send out to them Thomas, the lector, to read unto them from the Gesta Vitae Benedicti. It may save them from foolish and pernicious babbling. The abbot was left to himself once more, and bent his thin grey face over his illuminated breviary. So he remained while the senior monks filed slowly and sedately into the chamber, seating themselves upon the long oaken benches which lined the wall on either side. At the further end, in two high chairs as large as that of the abbot, though hardly as elaborately carved, sat the master of the novices and the chancellor, the latter a broad and portly priest, with dark mirthful eyes and a thick outgrowth of crisp black hair all round his tonsured head. Between them stood a lean, white-faced brother who appeared to be ill at ease, shifting his feet from side to side and tapping his chin nervously with a long parchment roll which he held in his hand. The abbot, from his point of vantage, looked down on the two long lines of faces, placid and sun-brown for the most part, with the large bovine eyes and unlined features which told of their easy, unchanging existence. Then he turned his eager, fiery gaze upon the pale-faced monk who faced him. "This plaint is thine, as I learn, Brother Ambrose," said he. "May the holy Benedict, patron of our house, be present this day and aid us in our findings. How many counts are there?" "Three, most holy father," the brother answered in a low and quavering voice. "Have you set them forth according to rule?" "Let the sheepskin be handed to the chancellor. Bring in Brother John, and let him hear the plaints which have been urged against him." At this order a lay brother swung open the door, and two other lay brothers entered, leading between them a young novice of the order. He was a man of huge stature, dark-eyed and red-headed, with a peculiar half-humorous, half-defiant expression upon his bold, well-marked features. His cowl was thrown back upon his shoulders, and his gown, unfastened at the top, disclosed a round, sinewy neck, ruddy and corded like the bark of the fir. Thick, muscular arms, covered with a reddish down, protruded from the wide sleeves of his habit, while his white shirt, looped up upon one side, gave a glimpse of a huge knotty leg, scarred and torn with the scratches of brambles. Charges brought upon the second Thursday after the Feast of the Assumption, in the year of our Lord 1366, against Brother John, formerly known as Hodel John, or John of Hodel, but now a novice in the Holy Monastic Order of the Cistercians. Read upon the same day at the Abbey of Beaulieu in the presence of the most Reverend Abbot Berghirsch and of the assembled order. First, that on the above-mentioned Feast of the Assumption, small beer having been served to the novices in the proportion of 1 quart to each full, the said Brother John did drain the pot at one draught to the detriment of Brother Paul, Brother Porphyry, and Brother Ambrose, who could scarce eat their nun-meat of salted stockfish on account of their exceeding dryness. At this solemn indictment, the novice raised his hand and twitched his lip, while even the placid senior brothers glanced across at each other and coughed to cover their amusement. The abbot alone sat grey and immutable, with a drawn face and a brooding eye. There was a buzz and murmur among the white-frocked brethren at this grave charge, but the abbot held up his long quivering hand. "What then?" said he. "Item, that between nones and vespers on the feast of James, the said Brother John was observed upon the Brockenhurst road, near the spot which is known as Hatchet's Pond, in converse with a person of the other sex, being a maiden of the name of Mary Soley, the daughter of the king's verderer. Item, that after sundry japes and jokes, the said Brother John did lift up the said Mary Soley and did take, carry, and convey her across a stream, to the infinite relish of the devil and the exceeding detriment of his own soul, which scandalous and wilful falling away was witnessed by 3 members of our order." A dead silence throughout the room, with a rolling of heads and upturning of eyes, bespoke the pious horror of the community. The abbot drew his grey brows low over his fiercely questioning eyes. "Who can vouch for this thing?" he asked. "That can I," answered the accuser. "So too can Brother Porphyry, who was with me, and Brother Mark of the Spicarium, who had been so much stirred and inwardly troubled by the sight that he now lies in a fever through it." "Nay," she smiled sweetly upon him and thanked him. "I can vouch it, and so can Brother Porphyry." At this sudden outflame of wrath, the 2 witnesses sank their faces onto their chests and sat as men crushed. The abbot turned his angry eyes away from them and bent them upon the accused, who met his searching gaze with a firm and composed face. "What hast thou to say, Brother John, upon these weighty things which are urged against you?" "Little enough," "Good father, little enough," said the novice, speaking English with a broad West Saxon drawl. The brothers, who were English to a man, pricked up their ears at the sound of the homely and yet unfamiliar speech. But the abbot flushed red with anger and struck his hand upon the oaken arm of his chair. "I know not about that," said Brother John. "I know only that the words come kindly to my mouth, for it was a speech of my fathers before me. Under your favor, I shall either use it now or hold my peace." "For the matter of the ale," continued Brother John, "I had come in hot from the fields, and had scarce got the taste of the thing before mine eye lit upon the bottom of the pot. It may be, too, that I spoke somewhat shortly concerning the bran and the beans, the same being poor provender and unfitted for a man of my inches. It is true also that I did lay my hands upon this jackfool of a brother Ambrose, though, as you can see, I did him little scathe. As regards a maid, too, it is true that I did heifer over the stream, she having on her hosen and shoon, whilst I had but my wooden sandals, which could take no hurt from the water. I should have thought shame upon my manhood, as well as my monkhood, if I had held back my hand from her." He glanced around as he spoke with the half-amused look which he had worn during the whole proceedings. "There is no need to go further," said the abbot. "He has confessed to all. It only remains for me to portion out the punishment which is due to his evil conduct." "John of Hordle," he thundered, "you have shown yourself during the 2 months of your novitiate to be a recreant monk, and one who is unworthy to wear the white garb which is the outer symbol of the spotless spirit. That dress shall therefore be stripped from thee, and thou shalt be cast into the outer world without benefit of clerkship, and without lot or part in the graces and blessings of those who dwell under the care of the blessed Benedict. Thou shalt come back neither to Beaulieu nor to any of the granges of Beaulieu, and thy name shall be struck off the scrolls of the order." The sentence appeared a terrible one to the older monks, who had become so used to the safe and regular life of the abbey that they would have been as helpless as children in the outer world. From their pious oasis they looked dreamily out at the desert of life, a place full of stormings and strivings, comfortless, restless, and overshadowed by evil. The young novice, however, appeared to have other thoughts, for his eyes sparkled and his smile broadened. It needed but that to add fresh fuel to the fiery mood of the prelate. "So much for thy spiritual punishment," he cried. "But it is to thy grosser feelings that we must turn in such natures as thine, and as thou art no longer under the shield of Holy Church, there is a less difficulty. Ho there, lay brothers, Francis, Naomi, Joseph, seize him and bind his arms, drag him forth, and let the foresters and the porters scourge him from the precincts." As these 3 brothers advanced towards him to carry out the abbot's direction, the smile faded from the novice's face, and he glanced right and left with his fierce brown eyes, like a bull at a baiting. Then, with a sudden deep-chested shout, he tore up the heavy oaken prie-dieu and poised it to strike, taking 2 steps backward a while, that none might take him at advantage. "By the black rood of Waltham," he roared, "if any knave among you lays a finger end upon the edge of my gown, I will crush his skull like a filbert." With his thick knotted arms, his thundering voice, and his bristle of red hay, there was something so repellent in the man that the 3 brothers flew back at the very glare of him, and the 2 rows of white monks strained away from him like poplars in a tempest. The abbot only sprang forward with shining eyes, but the chancellor and the master hung upon either arm and wrested him back out of danger's way. "He is possessed of a devil," they shouted. "Run, Brother Ambrose, Brother Joachim, Cole Hugh of the Mill, and Woodman What, and Raoul with his arbalist and bolts. Tell them that we are in fear of our lives. Run, run, for the love of the Virgin." But the novice was a strategist as well as a man of action. Springing forward, he hurled his unwieldy weapon at Brother Ambrose, and, as Des and Monk clattered onto the floor together, he sprang through the open door and down the winding stair. Sleepy old Brother Athanasius, at the porter's cell, had a fleeting vision of twinkling feet and flying skirts, but before he had time to rub his eyes the recreant had passed the lodge, and was speeding as fast as his sandals could patter along the Lyndhurst road. Never had the peaceful atmosphere of the old Cistercian house been so rudely ruffled. Never had there been insurrection so sudden, so short, and so successful. Yet the abbot Berghirsch was a man of too firm a grain to allow one bold outbreak to imperil the settled order of his great household. In a few hot and bitter words, he compared their false brother's exit to the expulsion of our first parents from the garden, and more than hinted that unless a reformation occurred, some others of the community might find themselves in the same evil and perilous case. Having thus pointed the moral and reduced his flock to a fitting state of docility, he dismissed them once more to their labors and withdrew himself to his own private chamber, there to seek spiritual aid in the discharge of the duties of his high office. The abbot was still on his knees, when a gentle tapping at the door of his cell broke in upon his orisons. Rising in no very good humor at the interruption, he gave the word to enter, but his look of impatience softened down into a pleasant and paternal smile as his eyes fell upon his visitor. He was a thin-faced, yellow-haired youth, rather above the middle size, comely and well sharp-end, with straight, lithe figure and eager, boyish features. His clear, pensive gray eyes and quick, delicate expression spoke of a nature which had unfolded far from the boisterous joys and sorrows of the world. Yet there was a set of the mouth and a prominence of the chin which relieved him of any trace of effeminacy. Impulsive he might be, enthusiastic, sensitive, with something sympathetic and adaptive in his disposition, but an observer of nature's tokens would have confidently pledged himself that there was native firmness and strength underlying his gentle, monk-bred ways. The youth was not clad in monastic garb, but in lay attire, though his jerkin, cloak, and hose were all of a somber hue, as befitted one who dwelt in sacred precincts. A broad leather strap hanging from his shoulder supported a scrip or satchel such as travelers were wont to carry. In one hand he grasped a thick staff pointed and shod with metal, while in the other he held his coif bonnet, which bore in its front a broad pewter metal stamp with the image of Our Lady of Rocamadour. "Art ready, then, fair son?" said the abbot. "This is indeed a day of comings and of goings. It is strange that in 12 hours the abbey should have cast off its foulest weed, and should now lose what we are fain to look upon as our choicest blossom." "You speak too kindly, father," the youth answered. "If I had my will I should never go forth, but should end my days here in Beaulieu. It had been my home as far back as my mind can carry me, and it is a sore thing for me to have to leave it." "Life brings many a cross," said the abbot gently. "Who is without them? Your going forth is a grief to us as well as to yourself. But there is no help. I had given my forward and sacred promise to your father, Edric the Franklin, that at the age of 20 you should be sent out into the world to see for yourself how you like the savour of it. Seat thee upon the settle, Alleyne, for you may need rest ere long." The youth sat down as directed, but reluctantly and with diffidence. The abbot stood by the narrow window, and his long black shadow fell slantwise across the rush-strewn floor. 20 years ago," he said, "your father, the Franklin of Minstead, died, leaving to the abbey 3 hides of rich land in the 100 of Melwood, and leaving to us also his infant son on condition that we should rear him until he came to man's estate. This he did partly because your mother was dead, and partly because your elder brother, now Sockman of Minstead, had already given sign of that fierce and rude nature which would make him no fit companion for you. It was his desire and request, however, that you should not remain in the cloisters, but should at a ripe age return into the world." "But, father," interrupted the young man, "it is surely true that I am already advanced several degrees in clerkship." "Yes, father. Exorcist." "Yes, father. Reader." "Yes, father. Acolyte." "Yes, father. But have sworn no vow of constancy or chastity." "No, father." "Then you are free to follow a worldly life. But let me hear, ere you start, what gifts you take away with you from Beaulieu. Some I already know. There is the playing of the Satoli and the rebec. Our choir will be done without you. You carve too." The youth's pale face flushed with the pride of the skilled workman. "Yes, Holy Father," he answered. "Thanks to good Brother Bartholomew, I carve in wood and in ivory, and can do something also in silver and in bronze. From Brother Francis I have learned to paint on vellum, on glass, and on metal, with a knowledge of those pigments and essences which can preserve the color against damp or abiding air. Brother Luke had given me some skill in damask work, and in the enameling of shrines, tabernacles, diptychs, and triptychs. For the rest, I know a little of the making of covers, the cutting of precious stones, and the fashioning of instruments. A goodly list, truly, cried the superior with a smile. What clerk of Cambridge or of Oxenford could say as much? But of thy reading, us not so much to show there, I fear. No, father, it had been slight enough. Yet, thanks to our good Chancellor, I am not wholly unlettered. I have read Occam, Bradwardine, and other of the schoolmen, together with the learned Duns Scotus and the book of the holy Aquinas. But of the things of this world, what have you gathered from your reading? From this high window you may catch a glimpse over the wooden point and the smoke of buckleshad of the mouth of the EXE and the shining sea. Now, I pray you, Alleyne, if a man were to take a ship and spread sail across yonder waters, where might he hope to arrive? True, and how if, after reaching the king's possessions, he still journeyed on to the eastward? He would then come upon that part of France which is still in dispute, and he might hope to reach the famous city of Avignon, where dwells our blessed Father, the prop of Christendom. And then he would pass through the land of the Almains and the great Roman Empire, and so to the country of the Huns and of the Lithuanian pagans, beyond which lies the great city of Constantine and the kingdom of the unclean followers of Mahmud. And beyond that, fair son, beyond that is Jerusalem and the Holy Land, and the great river which is its source in the Garden of Eden. And then, nay, good father, I cannot tell. Methinks the end of the world is not far from there. Then we can still find something to teach thee, Alleyne, said the abbot complacently. Know that many strange nations lie betwixt there and the end of the world. There is the country of the Amazons, and the country of the dwarfs, and the country of a fair but evil women who slay with beholding, like the basilisk. Beyond that again is the kingdom of Prester John and of the great Cham. These things I know for very sooth, for I had them from that pious Christian and valiant knight, Sir John de Mandeville, who stopped twice at Beaulieu on his way to and from Southampton, and discoursed to us concerning what he had seen from the reader's desk in the refectory, until there was many a good brother who got neither bit nor sup, so stricken were they by his strange tales. There are some things, replied the abbot gravely, into which it was never intended that we should inquire. But you have a long road before you. Whither will you first turn? To my brother's at Minstead. If he be indeed an ungodly and violent man, there is a more need that I should seek him out and see whether I cannot turn him to better ways. Alleyne Edricson bent his head while the abbot poured out his heartfelt supplication that heaven would watch over this young soul, now going forth into the darkness and danger of the world. It was no mere form for either of them. To them the outside life of mankind did indeed seem to be one of violence and of sin, beset with physical and still more with spiritual danger. Heaven, too, was very near to them in those days. God's direct agency was to be seen in the thunder and the rainbow, the whirlwind and the lightning. To the believer, clouds of angels and confessors, and martyrs, armies of the sainted and the saved, were ever stooping over their struggling brethren upon earth, raising, encouraging, and supporting them. Underneath, in the porch of the abbey, the monks had gathered to give him a last Godspeed. Many had brought some parting token by which he should remember them. There was Brother Bartholomew with a crucifix of rare carved ivory, and Brother Luke with a white-backed psalter adorned with golden bees, and Brother Francis with a slaying of the innocents most daintily set forth upon vellum. All these were duly packed away deep in the traveller's scrip, and above them old pippin-faced Brother Athanasius had placed a parcel of simnel bread and remmel cheese, with a small flask of the famous blue-sealed abbey wine. So, amid handshakings and laughings and blessings, Alleyne Edricson turned his back upon Beaulieu. Chapter 3. How Hordle John cozened the Fuller of Lymington. It is not, however, in the nature of things that a lad of 20, with young life glowing in his veins and all the wide world before him, should spend his first hours of freedom in mourning for what he had left. Long ere Alleyne was out of sound of the Beaulieu bells, he was striding sturdily along, swinging his staff and whistling as merrily as the birds in the thicket. It was an evening to raise a man's heart. the sun shining slantwise through the trees through delicate traceries across the road, with bars of golden light between. Away in the distance before and behind, the green boughs, now turning in places to a coppery redness, shot their broad arches across the track. The still summer air was heavy with the resinous smell of the great forest. Here and there a tawny brook prattled out from among the underwood and lost itself again in the ferns and brambles upon the further side. Save the dull piping of insects and the sough of the leaves, there was silence everywhere, the sweet, restful silence of nature. And yet there was no want of life. The whole wide wood was full of it. Now it was alive, furtive stoat which shot across the path upon some fell errand of its own. Then it was a wild cat which squatted upon the outlying branch of an oak and peeped at the traveller with a yellow and dubious eye. Once it was a wild sow which scuttled out of the bracken, with 2 young sounders at her heels, and once a lordly red stag walked daintily out from among the tree trunks, and looked around him with the fearless gaze of one who lived under the king's own high protection. Alleyne gave his staff a merry flourish, however, and the red deer bethought him that the king was far off, so streaked away from whence he came. The youth had now journeyed considerably beyond the furthest domains of the abbey. He was the more surprised, therefore, when, on coming round a turn in the path, he perceived a man clad in the familiar garb of the order, and seated in a clump of heather by the roadside. Alleyne had known every brother well, but this was a face which was new to him, a face which was very red and puffed, working this way and that, as though the man was sore perplexed in his mind. Once he shook both hands furiously in the air, and twice he sprang from his seat and hurried down the road. "Then you are in error, friend," the clerk answered, "for I have spent all my days within its walls." "So indeed," cried he. "Then perhaps canst tell me the name of a great lowly lump of a brother W.I., freckled face and a hand like a spade. His eyes were black and his hair was red and his voice like the parish bull. I trow that there cannot be 2 alike in the same cloisters." "That surely can be no other than brother John," said Alleyne. "I trust he has done you no wrong, that you should be so hot against him." "But how came this?" asked the young clerk, who could scarce keep from laughter at the sight of the hot little man so swathed in the great white cloak. "It came in this way," he said, sitting down once more. "I was passing this way, hoping to reach Lymington ere nightfall, when I came on this red-headed knave seated even where we are sitting now. I uncovered and lauded as I passed, thinking that he might be a holy man at his orisons, but he called to me and asked me if I had heard speak of the new indulgence in favor of the Cistercians. 'Not I,' I answered. 'Then the worse for thy soul,' said he, and with that he broke into a long tale how that on account of the virtues of the Abbot Berghirsch it had been decreed by the Pope that whoever should wear the habit of a monk or Beaulieu for as long as he might say the 7 Psalms of David should be assured of the kingdom of heaven. For myself, I could no more run than if I had been sown in a sack, so here I sit, and here I am like to sit, before I set eyes upon my clothes again.' 'That have I,' he answered, 'and close. But I care not to go nigh him in this plight, for his wife of the jibing tongue, and will spread the tale until I could not show my face in any market from Fordingbridge to Southampton. But if you, fair sir, out of your kind charity will be pleased to go a matter of 2 bowshots out of your way, you would do me such a service as I could scarce repay.' 'With all my heart,' said Alleyne readily. 'Then take this pathway on the left, I pray thee, and then the deer track which passes on the right. You will then see under a great beech tree the hut of a charcoal burner. Give him my name, good sir, the name of Peter the Fuller of Lymington, and ask him for a change of raiment, that I may pursue my journey without delay. There are reasons why he would be loath to refuse me.' Alleyne started off along the path indicated, and soon found the log hut where the burner dwelt. He was away faggot cutting in the forest, but his wife, a ruddy bustling dame, found the needful garments and tied them into a bundle. While she busied herself in finding and folding them, Alleyne Edricson stood by the open door looking in at her with much interest and some distrust, for he had never been so nigh to a woman before. She had round red arms, a dress of some sober woolen stuff, and a brass brooch the size of a cheesecake stuck in the front of it. "Aye, indeed, us been brought up at the Abbey then. I could read it from my reddened cheek and downcast eye. Us learned from the monks, I trow, to fear a woman as thou wouldst a leisure house. Out upon them, that they should dishonor their own mothers by such teaching. A pretty world it would be with all the women out of it. Amen and amen. But thou art a pretty lad, and the prettier for thy modest ways. It is easy to see from my cheek that thou hast not spent thy days in the rain and the heat and the wind, as my poor would have been forced to do. I have indeed seen little of life, good dame. Wilt find nothing in it to pay for the loss of thy own freshness. Here are the clothes, and Peter can leave them when next he comes this way. Holy Virgin, see the dust upon thy doublet. It were easy to see that there is no woman to tend to thee. So, that is better. Now bust me, boy. Alleyne stooped and kissed her, for the kiss was a common salutation of the age, and, as Erasmus long afterwards remarked, more used in England than in any other country. Yet it sent the blood to his temples again, and he wondered, as he turned away, what the Abbot Berghurst would have answered to so frank an invitation. He was still tingling from this new experience when he came out upon the high road and saw a sight which drove all other thoughts from his mind. Some way down from where he had left him, the unfortunate Peter was stamping and raving tenfold worse than before. Now, however, instead of the great white cloak, he had no clothes on at all, save a short woolen shirt and a pair of leather shoes. Far down the road a long-legged figure was running, with a bundle under one arm and the other hand to his side, like a man who laughs until he is sore. "See him," yelled Peter. "Look to him. You shall be my witness. He shall see Winchester jail for this. See where he goes with my cloak under his arm." "Who, then?" cried Alleyne. "Who but that cursed brother John? He hath not left me clothes enough to make a galley bagger. The double thief hath cozened me out of my gown." "Stay, though, my friend. It was his gown," objected Alleyne. "Are those the clothes? For dear charity's sake give them to me. Not the Pope himself shall have these from me, though he sent the whole college of cardinals to ask it. How came it? Why, you had scarce gone ere this lowly John came running back again, and, when I opened mouth to reproach him, he asked me whether it was indeed likely that a man of prayer would leave his own godly raiment in order to take a layman's jerkin. He had, he said, but gone for a while that I might be the freer for my devotions. On this I plucked off the gown, and he with much show of haste did begin to undo his points. But when I threw his frock down, he clipped it up and ran off all untrussed, leaving me in this sorry plight. He laughed so the while, like a great croaking frog, that I might have caught him had my breath not been as short as his legs were long. The young man listened to this tale of wrong with all the seriousness that he could maintain, but at the sight of the pursy red-faced man and the dignity with which he bore him, the laughter came so thick upon him that he had to lean up against a tree trunk. The fuller looked sadly and gravely at him, but finding that he still laughed, he bowed with much more politeness and stalked onwards in his borrowed clothes. Alleyne watched him until he was small in the distance, and then, wiping the tears from his eyes, he set off briskly once more upon his journey. Chapter 4. How the Bailiff of Southampton slew the two masterless men. The road along which he travelled was scarce as populous as most other roads in the kingdom, and far less so than those which lie between the larger towns. Yet from time to time Alleyne met other wayfarers, and more than once was overtaken by strings of pack mules and horsemen journeying in the same direction as himself. Once a begging friar came limping along in a brown habit, imploring in a most dolorous voice to get him a single groat to buy bread wherewith to save himself from impending death. Alleyne passed him swiftly by, for he had learned from the monks to have no love for the wandering friars, and, besides, there was a great half-gnawed mutton bone sticking out of his pouch to prove him a liar. Swiftly as he went, however, he could not escape the curse of the four-blessed evangelists which the mendicant howled behind him. So dreadful are his execrations that the frightened lad thrust his fingers into his ear-holes, and ran until the fellow was but a brown smirch upon the yellow road. Further on, at the edge of the woodland, he came upon a chapman and his wife, who sat upon a fallen tree. He had put his pack down as a table, and the two of them were devouring a great pasty, and washing it down with some drink from a stone jar. The chapman broke a rough jest as he passed, and the woman called shrilly to Alleyne to come and join them, on which the man, turning suddenly from mirth to wrath, began to belabor her with his cudgel. Alleyne hastened on, lest he make more mischief, and his heart was heavy as lead within him. Look where he would, He seemed to see nothing but injustice and violence and the hardness of man to man. But even as he brooded sadly over it and pined for the sweet peace of the abbey, he came on an open space dotted with holly bushes, where was the strangest sight that he had yet chanced upon. Near to the pathway lay a long clump of greenery, and from behind as there stuck straight up into the A4 human legs clad in party-colored hosen, yellow and black. Strangest of all was when a brisk tune struck suddenly up, and the four legs began to kick and twitter in time to the music. Walking on tiptoe round the bushes, he stood in amazement to see two men bounding about on their heads, while they played, the one a viol and the other a pipe, as merrily and as truly as though they were seated in a choir. Alleyne crossed himself as he gazed at this unnatural sight, and could scarce hold his ground with a steady face, when the two dancers, catching sight of him, came bouncing in his direction. A spear's length from him, they each threw a somersault into the air, and came down upon their feet with smirking faces and their hands over their hearts. A guerdon, my knight of the staring eyes, cried one. A gift, my prince, shouted the other. Any trifle will serve, a purse of gold, or even a jeweled goblet. Alleyne thought of what he had read of demoniac possession, the jumpings, the twitchings, the wild talk. It was in his mind to repeat over the exorcism proper to such attacks, but the two burst out laughing at his scared face, and turning onto their heads once more, clapped their heels in derision. "Us never seen tumblers before?" asked the elder, a black-browed, swarthy man, as brown and supple as a hazel twig. "Why shrink from us, then, as though we were the spawn of the evil one?" "Truly, sirs, it is a new sight to me," the clerk answered. "When I saw your four legs above the bush, I could scarce credit my own eyes. Why is it that you do this thing?" "A dry question to answer," cried the younger, coming back onto his feet. "A most husky question, my fair bird. But how? A flask, by all that is wonderful." He shot out his hand as he spoke, and plucking Ellayne's bottle out of his scrip, he deftly knocked the neck off and poured the half of it down his throat. The rest he handed to his comrade, who drank the wine, and then, to the clerk's increasing amazement, made a show of swallowing the bottle, with such skill that Alleyne seemed to see it vanish down his throat. A moment later, however, he flung it over his head and caught it bottom downwards upon the calf of his left leg. "We thank you for the wine, kind sir," said he, "and for the ready courtesy wherewith you offered it. Touching your question, we may tell you that we are strollers and jugglers, who, having performed with much applause at Winchester Fair, are now on our way to the great Michaelmas market at Ringwood. As our art is a very fine and delicate one, however, we cannot let a day go by without exercising ourselves in it, to which end we choose some quiet and sheltered spot where we may break our journey. Here you find us, and we cannot wonder that you, who are new to tumbling, should be astounded, since many great barons, earls, marshals, and knights, who have wandered as far as the Holy Land, are of one mind in saying that they have never seen a more noble or gracious performance. If you will be pleased to sit upon that stump, we will now continue our exercise." Alleyne sat down willingly as directed, with two great bundles on either side of him which contained the strollers' dresses, doublets of flame-colored silk and girdles of leather, spangled with brass and tin. The jugglers were on their heads once more, bounding about with rigid necks, playing the while in perfect time and tune. It chanced that out of one of the bundles there stuck the end of what the clerk saw to be a cithern, so drawing it forth, he tuned it up and twanged a harmony to the merry lilt which the dancers played. On it they dropped their own instruments, and putting their hands to the ground they hopped about faster and faster, ever shouting to him to play more briskly, until at last of very weariness all three had to stop. "Well played, sweet poppet," cried the younger, a so rare touch on the strings. "How knew you the tune?" asked the other. "You have a fine trick of you, then," said one. "We have long wished to meet such a man. Will join us and jog on to Ringwood? Thy duties shall be light, and thou shalt have 2d. a day and meat for supper every night." "Nay, it may not be. I have other work to do. I have tarried with you overlong," quoth Alleyne, and resolutely set forth upon his journey once more. They ran behind him some little way, offering him first 4d. and then 6d. a day, but he only smiled and shook his head, until at last they fell away from him. Looking back, he saw that the smaller had mounted on the younger shoulders, and that they stood so, some 10 feet high, waving their adieus to him. He waved back to them, and then hastened on, the lighter of heart for having fallen in with these strange men of pleasure. Alleyne had gone no great distance for all the many small passages that had befallen him. Yet to him, used as he was to a life of such quiet that the failure of a brewing or the altering of an anthem had seemed to be of the deepest import, the quick-changing play of the lights and shadows of life was strangely startling and interesting. A gulf seemed to divide this brisk, uncertain existence from the old steady round of work and a prayer which he had left behind him. The few hours that had passed since he saw the Abbey Tower stretched out in his memory until they outgrew whole months of the stagnant life of the cloister. The thought stole into Alleyne's heart as he looked upon the autumnal countryside and marveled at its beauty. He had little time to dwell upon it, however, for there were still 6 good miles between him and the nearest inn. He sat down by the roadside to partake of his bread and cheese, and then with a lighter scrip he hastened upon his way. Close at his heels came 3 laborious walking abreast, with spade and mattock over their shoulders. They sang some rude chorus right tunefully as they walked, but their English was so coarse and rough that to the ears of a cloister-bred man, it sounded like a foreign and barbarous tongue. One of them carried a young bittern which they had caught upon the moor, and they offered it to Alleyne for a silver groat. Very glad he was to get safely past them, for, with their bristling red beards and their fierce blue eyes, they were uneasy men to bargain with upon a lonely moor. Yet it is not always the burliest and the wildest who are the most to be dreaded. The workers looked hungrily at him, and then jogged onwards upon their way in slow, lumbering Saxon style. A worse man to deal with was a wooden-legged cripple who came hobbling down the path, so weak and so old to all appearance that a child need not stand in fear of him. Yet when Alleyne had passed him, of a sudden, out of pure devilment, he screamed out a curse at him, and sent a jagged flintstone hurtling past his ear. So horrid was the causeless rage of the crooked creature, that the clerk came over a cold thrill, and took to his heels until he was out of shot from stone or word. It seemed to him that in this country of England there was no protection for a man save that which lay in the strength of his own arm and the speed of his own foot. In the cloisters he had heard vague talk of the law, the mighty law which was higher than prelate or baron, yet no sign could he see of it. What was the benefit of a law written fair upon parchment? He wondered if there were no officers to enforce it. As it fell out, however, he had that very evening, ere the sun had set, a chance of seeing how stern was the grip of the English law when it did happen to seize the offender. A mile or so out upon the moor the road takes a very sudden dip into a hollow, with a peat-colored stream running swiftly down the center of it. To the right of this stood, and stands to this day, an ancient barrow, or burying mound, covered deeply in a bristle of heather and bracken. Alleyne was plodding down the slope upon one side, when he saw an old dame coming towards him upon the other, limping with weariness and leaning heavily upon a stick. When she reached the edge of the stream, she stood helpless, looking to right and to left for some ford. Where the path ran down, a great stone had been fixed in the center of the brook, but it was too far from the bank for her aged and uncertain feet. Twice she thrust forward at it, and twice she drew back, until at last, giving up in despair, she set herself down by the brink and wrung her hands wearily. There she still sat when Alleyne reached the crossing. "That is easily amended," said he cheerily, and picking her lightly up, for she was much worn with time, he passed across with her. He could not but observe, however, that as he placed her down her knees seemed to fail her, and she could scarcely prop herself up with her staff. "You are weak, mother," said he. "Us journeyed far, I wot." "From Wiltshire, friend," said she, in a quavering voice. 3 days have I been on the road. I go to my son, who is one of the king's regattas at Brockenhurst. He has ever said that he would care for me in mine old age. And rightly too, mother, since you cared for him in his youth. But when have you broken Faust?" "It is a long road yet to Brockenhurst," said Alleyne, "but here is such bread and cheese as I have left, and here, too, is a penny which may help you to supper. May God be with you." He had not gained the crown of the slope, when he heard a sudden scuffle behind him and a feeble voice bleating for help. Looking round, there was the old dame down upon the roadway, with a red wimple flying on the breeze, while the two rogues, black and white, stooped over her, wresting away from her the penny and such other poor trifles as were worth the taking. At the sight of a thin limb struggling in weak resistance, such a glow of fierce anger passed over Alleyne, as set his head in a whirl. Dropping his scrip, he bounded over the stream once more and made for the two villains, with his staff whirled over his shoulder and his grey eyes blazing with fury. The robbers, however, were not disposed to leave their victim until they had worked their wicked will upon her. The black man, with the woman's crimson scarf tied round his swarthy head, stood forward in the centre of the path, with a long dull-coloured knife in his hand, while the other, waving a ragged cudgel, cursed at Alleyne and bade him to come on. His blood was fairly aflame, however, and he needed no such challenge. Dashing at the black man, he smote at him with such good will that the other let his knife tinkle into the roadway, and hopped howling to a safer distance. The second rogue, however, made of sterner stuff, rushing upon the clock, and clipped him round the waist with a grip like a bay, shouting the while to his comrade to come round and stab him in the back. At this the negro took heart of grace, and picking up his dagger again, he came stealing with prowling step and murderous eye, while the two swayed backwards and forwards, staggering this way and that. In the very midst of the scuffle, however, whilst Alleyne braced himself to feel the cold blade between his shoulders, there came a sudden scurry of hoofs, and the black man yelled with terror and ran for his life through the heather. The man with the birthmark, too, struggled to break away, and Alleyne heard his teeth chatter and felt his limbs grow limp to his hand. At this sign of coming aid, the clerk held on the tighter, and at last was able to pin his man down and glance behind him to see where all the noise was coming from. "Here is one," said the leader, springing down from his reeking horse, and seizing the white rogue by the edge of his jerkin. "This is one of them. I know him by the devil's touch upon his brow. Where are your cords? Peterkin? So, bind him hand and foot. His last hour has come. And you, young man, who may you be?" "I am a clerk, sir, travelling from Beaulieu." "A clerk," cried the other. "Art from Oxenford or from Cambridge? Hast thou a letter from the chancellor of thy college giving thee a permit to beg? Let me see thy letter." He had a stern, square face, with bushy side whiskers and a very questioning eye. "I am from Beaulieu Abbey, and I have no need to beg," said Alleyne, who was all of a tremble now that the ruffle was over. "The better for thee," the other answered. "Dost know who I am?" "No, sir, I do not." "I am the law." Nodding his head solemnly, "I am the law of England and the mouthpiece of his most gracious and royal majesty, Edward III. "He could not have gone far, Sir Bailiff," cried one of the archers, unslinging his bow. "He is in hiding somewhere," for he knew well, black paynim as he is, that our horses for legs had outstripped his two. As it chanced, however, the searchers had not far to seek. The negro had burrowed down into his hiding place upon the barrow, where he might have lain snug enough, had it not been for the red gear upon his head. As he raised himself to look over the bracken at his enemies, the staring colour caught the eye of the bailiff, who broke into a long screeching whoop and spurred forward sword in hand. Seeing himself discovered, the man rushed out from his hiding place and bounded at the top of his speed down the line of archers, keeping a good 100 paces to the front of them. The two who were on either side of Alleyne bent their bows as calmly as though they were shooting at the popinjay at the village fair. "7, you jack fool," growled the first speaker, and his bow twanged like a harp string. The black man sprang high up into the air and shot out both his arms and his legs, coming down all a-sprawl among the heather. "Right under the blade bone," quoth the archer, sauntering forward for his arrow. "Dead as Pontius Pilate, worshipful sir." "It is well. Now, as to the other knave, there are trees and despair over yonder, but we have scarce leisure to make for them. Draw thy sword, Thomas of Redbridge, and hew me his head from his shoulders. I will confess to my crime. It was indeed I and the black cook, both from the Shiplar Rose de Gloria, of Southampton, who did set upon the Flanders merchant and rob him of his spicery and his mercery, for which, as we well know, you hold a warrant against us. There is little merit in this confession, quoth the bailiff sternly. Thou hast done evil within my bailiwick, and must die. But, sir, urged Alleyne, who was white to the lips at these bloody doings, he hath not yet come to trial. Young clerk, said the bailiff, you speak of that of which you know nothing. It is true that he hath not come to trial, but the trial hath come to him. He hath fled the law and is beyond its pale. Touch not that which is no concern of thine. But what is this boon, rogue, which you would crave? I have in my shoe, most worshipful sir, a strip of wood which belonged once to the bark wherein the blessed pole was dashed up against the island of Melita. I bought it for 2 rose nobles from a shipman who came from the Levant. The boon I crave is that you will place it in my hands and let me die still grasping it. In this manner, not only shall my own eternal salvation be secured, but thine also, for I shall never cease to intercede for thee. At the command of the bailiff, they plucked off the fellow's shoe, and there sure enough at the side of the instep, wrapped in a piece of fine sendal, lay a long, dark splinter of wood. The archers doffed caps at the sight of it, and the bailiff crossed himself devoutly as he handed it to the robber. As they passed Alleyne, so that one of the men was wiping his sword blade upon the menere of his horse, a deadly sickness came over him at the sight, and sitting down by the wayside he burst out weeping, with his nerves all in a jangle. It was a terrible world, thought he, and it was hard to know which were the most to be dreaded, the knaves or the men of the law. Chapter 5. How a strange company gathered at the Pied Merlin. The night had already fallen, and the moon was shining between the rifts of ragged, drifting clouds, before Alleyne Edricson, footsore and weary from the unwonted exercise, found himself in front of the forest in which stood upon the outskirts of Lyndhurst. The building was long and low, standing back a little from the road, with 2 flambeaux blazing on either side of the door as a welcome to the traveller. From one window there thrust forth a long pole with a bunch of greenery tied to the end of it, a sign that liquor was to be sold within. As Alleyne walked up to it, he perceived that it was rudely fashioned out of beams of wood, with twinkling lights all over where the glow from within shone through the chinks. Alleyne stood still in the roadway for a few minutes, reflecting upon what he should do. It was, he knew, only a few miles further to Minstead, where his brother dwelt. On the other hand, he had never seen this brother since childhood, and the reports which had come to his ears concerning him were seldom to his advantage. By all accounts, he was a hard and a bitter man. He would bide with him for a time and do what he might to serve him. If, on the other hand, he should have hardened his heart against him, he could only go on his way and do the best he might by his skill as a craftsman and a scrivener. At the end of a year he would be free to return to the cloisters, for such had been his father's bequest. A monkish upbringing, 1 year in the world after the age of 20, and then a free selection one way or the other, it was a strange course which had been marked out for him. Such as it was, however, he had no choice but to follow it, and if he were to begin by making a friend of his brother, he had best wait until morning before he knocked at his dwelling. The rude plank door was ajar, but as Alleyne approached it there came from within such a gust of rough laughter and clatter of tongues that he stood irresolute upon the threshold. Summoning courage, however, and reflecting that it was a public dwelling, in which he had as much right as any other man, he pushed it open and stepped into the common room. Though it was an autumn evening and somewhat warm, a huge fire of heaped billets of wood crackled and sparkled in a broad, open grate, some of the smoke escaping up a rude chimney, but the greater part rolling out into the room, so that the air was thick with it, and a man coming from without could scarce catch his breath. On this fire a great cauldron bubbled and simmered, giving forth a rich and promising smell. Seated round it were a dozen or so folk, of all ages and conditions, who set up such a shout as Alleyne entered that he stood peering at them through the smoke, uncertain what this riotous greeting might portend. "Arouse! Arouse!" cried one rough-looking fellow in a tattered jerkin. "One more round of mead or ale, and the score to the last comer." "'Tis the Lord the Pied Merlin," shouted another. "Ho, there, Dame Eliza! Here is fresh custom come to the house, and not a drain for the company." "Why, good dame," said Alleyne. "I would not offend the customs of your house, but it is only sooth when I say that my purse is a thin one. As far as 2 pence will go, however, I shall be right glad to do my part." A fair enough question, but it is as fairly answered. I joined them because Marjorie Alspay of Boulder married crooked Thomas of Ringwood, and left a certain John of Hordle in the cold, for that he was a ranting, roving blade who was not to be trusted in wedlock. That was why, being fond and hot-headed, I left the world, and that is why, having had time to take thought, I am right glad to find myself back in it once more. Ill betide the day that ever I took off my yeoman's jerkin to put on the white gown. Whilst he was speaking, the landlady came in again, bearing a broad platter, upon which stood all the beakers and flagons charged to the brim with the brown ale or the ruby wine. Behind her came a maid with a high pile of wooden plates, and a great sheaf of spoons, one of which he handed round to each of the travellers. 2 of the company, who were dressed in the weather-stained green doublet of foresters, lifted the big pot off the fire, and a third, with a huge pewter ladle, served out a portion of steaming collops to each guest. Alleyne bore his share and his ale-mug away with him to a retired trestle in the corner, where he could sup in peace and watch the strange scene, which was so different to those silent and well-ordered meals to which he was accustomed. There was no furniture, save a single long dresser covered with coarse crockery, and a number of wooden benches and trestles, the legs of which sank deeply into the soft clay floor, while the only light, save of the fire, was furnished by 3 torches stuck in sockets on the wall, which flickered and crackled, giving forth a strong resinous odor. All this was novel and strange to the cloister-bred youth, but most interesting of all was the motley circle of guests who sat eating their collops round the blaze. They were a humble group of wayfarers, such as might have been found that night in any and through the length and breadth of England, but to him they represented that vague world against which he had been so frequently and so earnestly warned. It did not seem to him from what he could see of it to be such a very wicked place after all. 3 or 4 of the men round the fire were evidently underkeepers and verderers from the forest, sunburned and bearded, with a quick restless eye and live movements of the deer among which they lived. Close to the corner of the chimney sat a middle-aged gleeman, clad in a faded garb of Norwich cloth, the tunic of which was so outgrown that it did not fasten at the neck and at the waist. His face was swollen and coarse, and his watery protruding eyes spoke of a life which never wandered very far from the wine-pot. A gilt harp, blotched with many stains, and with 2 of its strings missing, was tucked under one of his arms, while with the other he scooped greedily at his platter. Next to him sat 2 other men of about the same age, one with a trimming of fur to his coat, which gave him a dignity which was evidently dearer to him than his comfort, for he still drew it round him in spite of the hot glare of the faggots. The other, clad in a dirty russet suit with a long sweeping doublet, had a cunning, foxy face with keen, twinkling eyes and a peaky beard. Next to him sat Hordle John, and beside him 3 other rough, unkempt fellows with tangled beards and matted hay, freeloaders from the adjoining farms, where small patches of freehold property had been suffered to remain scattered about in the heart of the royal domain. The company was completed by a peasant in a rude dress of undyed sheepskin, with the old-fashioned galligaskins about his legs, and a gaily dressed young man with striped cloak jagged at the edges and party-colored hosen, who looked about him with high disdain upon his face, and held a blue-smelling flask to his nose with one hand, while he brandished a busy spoon with the other. In the corner a very fat man was lying all asprawl upon a truss, snoring stertorously, and evidently in the last stage of drunkenness. "Why," said Alleyne, "a merlin is a bird of the same form as an eagle or falcon. I can well remember that learned brother Bartholomew, who is deep in all the secrets of nature, pointed one out to me as we walked together near Vinny Ridge. A falcon or an eagle, quotha, and pied, that is of 2 several colours. So any man would say except this barrel of lies. He came to me, look you, saying that if I would furnish him with a gallon of ale, wherewith to strengthen himself as he worked, and also the pigments and a board, he would paint for me a noble pied merlin which I might hang along with the blazonry over my door. I, poor simple fool, gave him the ale and all that he craved, leaving him alone too, because he said that a man's mind must be left untroubled when he had great work to do. When I came back, the gallon jar was empty, and he lay as you see him, with a board in front of him with this sorry device. She raised up a panel which was leaning against the wall, and showed a rude painting of a scraggy and angular fowl, with very long legs and a spotted body. "Was that," she asked, "like the bird which thou hast seen?" Alleyne shook his head, smiling. "No, nor any other bird that ever wagged a feather. It is most like a plucked pullet which has died of the spotted fever. And scarlet too. What would the gentle Sir Nicholas Bohant, or Sir Bernard Brocas, of Rushcourt, say if they saw such a thing? Or, perhaps, even the King's own Majesty himself, who often has ridden past this way, and who loves his falcons as he loves his sons. It would be the downfall of my house." "The matter is not past mending," said Alleyne. "I pray you, good dame, to give me those 3 pigment pots and the brush, and I shall try whether I cannot better this painting." Dame Eliza looked doubtfully at him, as though fearing some other stratagem, but, as he made no demand for ale, she finally brought the paints, and watched him as he smeared on his background, talking the while about the folk round the fire. "The 4 forest lads must be jogging soon," she said. "They bide at Emery Down, a mile or more from here. Yeomen prickers they are, who tend to the King's hunt. The gleeman is cold Floyding Will. He comes from the north country, but for many years he hath gone the round of the forest from Southampton to Christchurch. He drinks much and pays little, but it would make your ribs crackle to hear him sing the jest of Hendy Tobias. Mayhap he will sing it when the ale has warmed him." "Who are those next to him?" asked Alleyne, much interested. "He of the fur mantle has a wise and reverent face. He is a seller of pills and salves, very learned in humours, and rheums, and fluxes, and all manner of ailments. He weighs, as you perceive, the vernicle of sainted Luke, the first physician, upon his sleeve. May good St. Thomas of Kent grant that it may be long before either I or mine need his help. He is here tonight for herbergage, as are the others except the foresters. His neighbour is a tooth-drawer. That bag at his girdle is full of the teeth that he drew at Winchester Fay. I warrant that there are more sound ones than sorry, for he is quick at his work and a trifle dim in the eye. The lusty man next him with the red head I have not seen before." "And the other?" asked Alleyne in a whisper. "He is surely some very great man, for he looks as though he scorned those who were about him." The landlady looked at him in a motherly way and shook her head. "You have had no great truck with the world," she said, "or you would have learned that it is the small men and not the great who hold their noses in the air. Look at those shields upon my wall and under my eaves. Each of them is a device of some noble lord or gallant knight, who has slept under my roof at one time or another. Yet milder men or easier to please I have never seen. Eating my bacon and drinking my wine with a merry face, and paying my score with some courteous word, or jest which was dearer to me than my profit. Those are the true gentles. But your chapman or your bearward will swear that there's a lime in the wine, and water in the ale, and fling off at the last with a curse instead of a blessing. This youth is a scholar from Cambridge, where men are wont to be blown out by a little knowledge, and lose the use of their hands in learning the laws of the Romans. But I must away to lay down the beds. So may the saints keep you and prosper you in your undertaking. Sir Humphrey Tennant of Ashby may till his own fields for me," he cried. "The castle has thrown its shadow upon the cottage overlong. For 300 years my folk have swinked and sweated, day in and day out, to keep the wine on the Lord's table and the harness on the Lord's back. Let him take off his plates and delve himself, if delving must be done. He would have sold me with his acres." The other cried, in a voice which was hoarse with passion. "The man, the woman, and their litter," so ran the words of the doted bailiff. Never bullock on the farm was sold more lightly. Ha! He may wake some black night to find the flames licking about his ears. For fire is a good friend to the poor man, and I have seen a smoking heap of ashes where overnight there stood just such another Castlewick as Ashby. "This is a lad of mettle," shouted another of the labourers. He dazed to give tongue to what all men think. "Are we not all from Adam's loins, all with flesh and blood, and with the same mouth that must needs have food and drink? Where all this difference then between the ermine cloak and the leathern tunic, if what they cover is the same? It would take a clever man to live upon thy labour, Hugh. remarked one of the foresters, seeing that the half of thy time is spent in swilling mead at the Pied Merlin. Better that than stealing the deer that thou art placed a guard, like some folk I know. If you dare open that swine's mouth against me, shouted the woodman, I'll crop your ears for you before the hangman has the doing of it, thou long-jawed lack-brain. Nay, gentles, gentles, cried Dame Eliza, in a sing-song heedless voice, which showed that such bickerings were nightly things among her guests. No brawling or brabbling. Gentles, take heed to the good name of the house. No man is my master save the king, the woodman answered. Who is there, save a false traitor, who would refuse to serve the English king? I know not about the English king, said the man Jenkin. What sort of English king is it who cannot lay his tongue to a word of English? You mind last year when he came down to Melwood, with his inner marshal and his outer marshal, his justiciar, his seneschal, and his 24 guardsmen. One noontide I was by Franklin Swinton's gate, when up he rides with a yeoman pricker at his heels. Over, he cried, over, or some such word, making signs to me to open the gate, and then messy, as though he were dread of me. And you talk of an English king. I do not marvel at it, cried the Cambridge scholar, speaking in the high drawling voice which was common among his class. It is not a tongue for men of sweet birth and delicate upbringing. It is a foul, snorting, snarling manner of speech. For myself, I swear by the learned Polycarp that I have most ease with Hebrew, and after that perchance with Arabian. This loud speech, coming from a man of so formidable an appearance, somewhat daunted the disloyal party, and they fell into a sullen silence, which enabled Alleyne to hear something of the talk which was going on in the further corner between the physician, the tooth-drawer, and the gleeman. A raw rat, the man of drugs was saying, that is what it is ever my use to order for the plague, a raw rat with its paunch cut open. Might it not be broiled, most learned sir? Asked the tooth-drawer. A raw rat sounds a most sorry and cheerless dish. Not to be eaten, cried the physician, in high disdain. Why should any man eat such a thing? Why, indeed? Asked the gleeman, taking a long drain at his tankard. It is to be placed on the sore or swelling. For the rat, mark you, being a foul-living creature, of the natural drawing or affinity for all foul things, so that the noxious humours pass from a man into the unclean beast. Would that cure the Black Death, master? Asked Jenkin. Aye, truly would it, my fair son. How that then? Asked Hordle John. Why, friend, it is easy to see that you have not worked with your hands, or you would not need to ask. When half the folk in the country were dead, it was then that the other half could pick and choose who they would work for, and for what wage. That is why I say that the Murrain was the best friend that the Borough folk ever had. If it come to that, said one of the foresters, the tough meat of them will wear folks' teeth out, and there is a trade for the man who can draw them. A general laugh followed this sally at the dentist's expense, in the midst of which the gleeman placed his battered harp upon his knee, and began to pick out a melody upon the frayed strings. Elbow room for Floyding will, cried the woodman. Twang us a merry lilt. Aye, aye, the Lessers of Lancaster, one suggested, or St. Simeon and the Devil. To all these suggestions the jongleur made no response, but sat with his eye fixed abstractedly upon the ceiling, as one who calls words to his mind. Then, with a sudden sweep across the strings, he broke out into a song so gross and so foul that ere he had finished a verse the pure-minded lad sprang to his feet with the blood tingling in his face. How can you sing such things? He cried. You, too, an old man who should be an example to others. The wayfarers all gazed in the utmost astonishment at the interruption. By the holy Diken of Hampole, our silent clerk has found his tongue, said one of the woodmen. What is amiss with the song, then? How has it offended your babyship? A milder and better mannered song hath never been heard within these walls, cried another. What sort of talk is this for a publican? Shall it be a litany, my good clerk? Shouted a third. Or would it be good enough to serve? The jongleur had put down his harp in high dudgeon. Am I to be preached to by a child? He cried, staring across at Alleyne with an inflamed and angry countenance. Is a hairless infant to raise his tongue against me, when I have sung in every fair from Tweed to Trent, and have twice been named aloud by the High Court of the Minstrels at Beverley? I shall sing no more tonight. Nay, but you will so, said one of the laborious. Hi, Dame Eliza, bring a stoop of your best, Will, to clear his throat. Go forward with thy song, and if our girl-faced clerk does not love it, he can take to the road and go whence he came. Nay, but not too fast, broke in Hordle John. There are 2 words in this matter. It may be that my little comrade has been over quick in reproof, he having gone early into the cloisters and seen little of the rough ways and words of the world. Yet there is truth in what he says, for, as you know well, the song was not of the cleanest. I shall stand by him, therefore, and he shall neither be put out on the road, nor shall his ears be offended indoors. Indeed, your high and mighty grace, sneered one of the yeomen, have you in sooth so ordained? By the Virgin, said a second, I think that you may both chance to find yourselves upon the road before long. And so Bill aboard as to be scarce able to crawl along it, cried a third. Nay, I shall go, said Alleyne hurriedly, as Hordle John began to slowly roll up his sleeve and bare an arm like a leg of mutton. I would not have you brawl about me. Hush, lad, he whispered, I count them not a fly. They may find they have more tow on their distaff than they know how to spin. Stand thou clear and give me space. Both the foresters and the labourers had risen from their bench, and Dame Eliza and the travelling doctor had flung themselves between the 2 parties with soft words and soothing gestures, when the door of the Pied Merlin was flung violently open, and the attention of the company was drawn from their own quarrel to the newcomer who had burst so unceremoniously upon them. Chapter 6. How Samkin Aylward wagered his feather bed. He was a middle-sized man, of most massive and robust build, with an arching chest and extraordinary breadth of shoulder. His shaven face was as brown as a hazelnut, tanned and dried by the weather, with harsh, well-marked features, which were not improved by a long white scar which stretched from the corner of his left nostril to the angle of the jaw. His eyes were bright and searching, with something of menace and of authority in their quick glitter, and his mouth was firm-set and hard, as befitted one who was wont to set his face against danger. A straight sword by his side and a painted longbow jutting over his shoulder proclaimed his profession, while his scarred brigandine of chainmail and his dinted steel cap showed that he was no holiday soldier, but one who was even now fresh from the wars. A white surcoat with a lion of St. George in red upon the centre covered his broad breast, while a sprig of new-plucked broom at the side of his headgear gave a touch of gaiety and grace to his grim, war-worn equipment. How? He cried, blinking like an owl in the sudden glare. Good even to you, comrades. Ola, a woman, by my soul, and in an instant he had clipped Dame Eliza round the waist and was kissing her violently. His eye happening to wander upon the maid, however, he instantly abandoned the mistress and danced off after the other, who scurried in confusion up one of the ladders and dropped a heavy trapdoor upon her pursuer. He then turned back and saluted the landlady once more with the utmost relish and satisfaction. La petite is frightened, said he. Ah, c'est l'amour, l'amour. Curse this trick of French, which will stick to my throat. I must wash it out with some good English ale. By my hilt, camarades, there is no drop of French blood in my body, and I am a true English bowman, Samkin Aylward by name, and I tell you, Miss Amos, that it warms my very heart roots to set my feet on the dear old land once more. When I came off the galley at Hythe, this very day, I down on my bones, and I kissed the good brown earth, as I kiss thee now, ma belle, for it was 8 long years since I had seen it. The very smell of it seemed life to me. But where are my 6 rascals? Ola, there, en avant. Number 1. A French feather bed with the 2 counterpanes of white sendal, said he. Hey, worthy sir, answered the first of the bearers, laying a great package down in the corner. Not I, most worthy sir, cried the carrier, shrinking away from the fierce eyes of the bowman. Whither? To the devil if ye will. What is it to me? Now, ma belle, to supper, a pair of cold capons, a mortress of brawn, or what you will, with a flask or 2 of the right Gascony. I have crowns in my pouch, my sweet, and I mean to spend them. Bring in wine while the food is dressing. Buvons, my brave lads, you shall each empty a stoup with me. Here was an offer which a company in an English inn at that, or any other date, are slow to refuse. The flagons were regathered and came back with the white foam dripping over their edges. 2 of the woodmen and 3 of the labourers drank their portions off hurriedly and trooped off together, for their homes were distant and the hour late. The others, however, drew closer, leaving the place of honor to the right of the gleeman to the free-handed newcomer. He had thrown off his steel cap and his brigandine, and had placed them with his sword, his quiver, and his painted longbow on the top of his varied heap of plunder in the corner. Now, with his thick and somewhat bowed legs stretched in front of the blaze, his green jerkin thrown open, and a great quart-pot held in his corded fist, he looked a picture of comfort and of good fellowship. His hard-set face had softened, and the thick crop of crisp brown curls which had been hidden by his helmet grew low upon his massive neck. He might have been 40 years of age, though hard toil and harder pleasure had left their grim marks upon his features. Alleyne had ceased painting his pied Merlin, and sat, brush in hand, staring with open eyes at a type of men so strange and so unlike any whom he had met. Men had been good or had been bad in his catalogue, but here was a man who was fierce one instant and gentle the next, with a curse on his lips and a smile in his eye. What was to be made of such a man as that? "I never have," said Alleyne frankly, "though I have oft heard talk of their deeds." "By my hilt," cried the other, "if you were to cross the narrow sea, you would find them as thick as bees at a tea-hole. Couldst not shoot a bolt down any street of Bordeaux, I warrant, but you would pink archer, squire, or knight. There are more breastplates than gabardines to be seen, I promise you, where there is as much more waiting for any brave lad to pick it up, where a good man can always earn a good wage, and where he need look upon no man as his paymaster, but just reach his hand out and help himself. Aye, it is a goodly and a proper life. And here I drink to mine old comrades, and the saints be with them. Arouse all together, mes enfants, under pain of my displeasure, to Sir Claude Latier and the White Company." "Sir Claude Latier and the White Company," shouted the travellers, draining off their goblets. "Well quaffed, mis braves. It is for me to fill your cups again, since you have drained them to my dear lads of the white jerkin. Hola, mon Angie, bring wine and ale. How runs the old stave?" He roared out the catch in a harsh, unmusical voice, and ended with a shout of laughter. "I trust that I am a better bowman than a minstrel," said he. Many a time in the after days Alleyne Edricson seemed to see that scene, for all that so many which were stranger and more stirring was soon to crowd upon him. The fat, red-faced gleeman, the listening group, the archer with upraised finger beating in time to the music, and the huge sprawling figure of Hoardle John, all thrown into red light and black shadow by the flickering fire in the center, memory was to come often lovingly back to it. At the time he was lost in admiration at the deft way in which the jongleur disguised the loss of his 2 missing strings, and the lusty, hearty fashion in which he trolled out his little ballad of the outland bowman, which ran in some such fashion as this. "Well sung, by my hilt," shouted the archer in high delight. "Many a night have I heard that song, both in the old war time and after in the days of the White Company, when Black Simon of Norwich would lead the stave, and 400 of the best bowmen that ever drew string would come roaring in upon the chorus. I have seen old John Hawkwood, the same who has led half the company into Italy, stand laughing in his beard as he heard it, until his plates rattled again. But to get the full smack of it, you must yourselves be English bowmen, and be far off upon an outland soil." Whilst the song had been singing Dame Eliza, and the maid had placed a board across 2 trestles, and had laid upon it the knife, the spoon, the salt, the tranquire of bread, and finally the smoking dish which held the savory supper. The archer settled himself to it like one who had known what it was to find good food scarce, but his tongue still went as merrily as his teeth. "It passes me," he cried, "how all you lusty fellows can bide scratching your backs at home when there are such doings over the seas. Look at me, what have I to do? It is but the eye to the cord to the shaft, and the shaft to the mark. There is the whole song of it. It is but what you do yourselves for pleasure upon a Sunday evening at the parish village butts." And the wage? Asked the labourer. You see what the wage brings. He answered, I eat of the best, and I drink deep. I treat my friend, and I ask no friend to treat me. I clap a silk gown on my girl's back. Never a knight's lady shall be better betrimmed and betrinketed. How of all that, mon garçon? And how of the heap of trifles that you can see for yourselves in yonder corner? They are from the South French, every one, upon whom I have been making war. By my hilt, comrades, I think that I may let my plunder speak for itself. It seems indeed to be a goodly service, said the tooth-drawer. Tete bleu. Yes, indeed. Then there's the chance of a ransom. Why, look you, in the affair at Brignais some 4 years back, when the companies slew James of Bourbon and put his army to the sword, there was scarce a man of ours who had not count, baron, or knight. Peter Carsdale, who was but a common country lout newly brought over, with the English fleas still hopping under his doublet, laid his great hands upon the Sieur Murray de Chatenville, who owns half Picari, and had 5,000 crowns out of him, with his horse and harness. 'Tis true that a French wench took it all off Peter as quick as a Frenchman paid it. But what then? By the twang of string. It would be a bad thing if money was not made to be spent. And how better than on woman? Eh, ma belle? It would indeed be a bad thing if we had not our brave archers to bring wealth and kindly customs into the country, quoth Dame Eliza, on whom the soldier's free and open ways had made a deep impression. A toy, ma chérie, said he, with his hand over his heart. Hola, there is la petite peeping from behind the door. A toy, aussi, ma petite. Mon Dieu, but the lass is a good colour. There is one thing, fair sir, said the Cambridge student in his piping voice, which I would fain that you would make more clear. As I understand it, there was peace made of the town of Bretigny some 6 years back between our most gracious monarch and the king of the French. This being so, it seems most passing strange that you should talk so loudly of war and of companies when there is no quarrel between the French and us. Meaning that I lie, said the archer, laying down his knife. May heaven forfend, cried the student hastily. Magna is veritas et rara, which means in the Latin tongue that archers are all honorable men. I come to you seeking knowledge, for it is my trade to learn. I fear that you are yet apprentice to that trade, quoth the soldier, for there is no child over the water but could answer what you ask. Know then that though there may be peace between our own provinces and the French, yet within the marches of France there is always war, for the country is much divided against itself, and is furthermore harried by bands of flayers, skinners, Brabacons, Tardvinus, and the rest of them, when every man's grip is on his neighbour's throat, and every 5 sous piece of baron is marching with tuck of drum to fight whom he will, it would be a strange thing if 500 brave English boys could not pick up a living. Now that Sir John Hawkwood had gone with the East Anglian lads and the Nottingham woodmen into the service of the Marquis of Montferrat to fight against the Lord of Milan, there are but 10 score of us left, yet I trust that I may be able to bring some back with me to fill the ranks of the White Company. By the tooth of Peter, it would be a bad thing if I could not muster many a Hampton's high man who would be ready to strike in under the red flag of St. George, and the more so if Sir Nigel Loing, of Christchurch, should don hauberk once more and take the lead of us. Aye, you would indeed be in luck then, quoth a woodman, for it is said that, setting aside the prince, and mayhap good old Sir John Chandos, there was not in the whole army a man of such tried courage. It is sooth, every word of it, the archer answered. I have seen him with these 2 eyes in a stricken field, and never did man carry himself better. Mon Dieu. Yes, you would not credit it to look at him, or to hearken to his soft voice, but from the sailing from Orwell down to the foray to Paris, and that is clear 20 years, there was not a skirmish, onfall, sally, bushment, escalado, or battle, but Sir Nigel was in the heart of it. I go now to Christchurch with a letter to him from Sir Claude Latour to ask him if he will take the place of Sir John Hawkwood, and there is a more chance that he will if I bring 1 or 2 likely men at my heels. What say you, woodman? Wilt leave the bucks to loose a shaft at a nobler mark? The forester shook his head. I have wife and child at Emery Down, quoth he. I would not leave them for such a venture. You, then, young sir, asked the archer. Nay, I am a man of peace, said Alleyne Edricson. Besides, I have other work to do. Pest, growled the soldier, striking his flagon on the board until the dishes dance again. What, in the name of the devil, hath come over the folk? Why sit ye all moping by the fireside, like crows round a dead horse, when there is man's work to be done within a few short leagues of ye? Out upon you all, as a set of laggards and hangbacks. By my hilt, I believe that the men of England are all in France already, and that what is left behind are in sooth the women dressed up in their poltacks and hosen. By my hilt, then, I have found a man at last, shouted the bowman, and, for God, you are a better man than I take you for if you can lay me on my back, mon garcon. I have won the ram more times than there are toes to my feet, and for 7 long years I have found no man in the company who could make my jerkin dusty. Pasques die you, cried the archer, loosening his jerkin, and eyeing his foeman over with the keen glance of one who is a judge of manhood. I have only once before seen such a body of a man. By your leave, my red-headed friend, I should be right sorry to exchange buffet with you, and I will allow that there is no man in the company who would pull against you on a rope, so let that be a salve to your pride. On the other hand, I should judge that you have led a life of ease for some months back, and that my muscle is harder than your own. I am ready to wager upon myself against you if you are not afeard. But the wager? I have naught to wager. Come out for the love and the lust of the thing. Naught to wager, cried the soldier. Why, you have that which I covet above all things. It is that big body of thine that I am after. See, now, mon garcon, I have a French featherbed day, which I have been at pains to keep these years back. I had it at the sacking of Issodun, and the king himself hath not such a bed. If you throw me, it is thine. But if I throw you, then you are under a vow to take bow and bill and hie with me to France, there to serve in the White Company as long as we be enrolled. Then you may bid farewell to your bed, soldier, said Hotel John. Nay, I shall keep the bed, and I shall have you to France in spite of your teeth, and you shall live to thank me for it. How shall it be, then, mon enfant, call an elbow, or close lock, or catch how you can? To the devil with your tricks, said John, opening and shutting his great red hands. Stand forth, and let me clip thee. Big John stood waiting in the center with a sullen, menacing eye, and his red hair in a bristle, while the archer paced lightly and swiftly to the right and the left with crooked knee and hands advanced. Then with a sudden dash, so swift and fierce that the eye could scarce follow it, he flew in upon his man and locked his leg round him. It was a grip that, between men of equal strength, would mean a fall, but Hotel John tore him off from him as he might a rat, and hurled him across the room, so that his head cracked up against a wooden wall. "Mau ever I," cried the bowman, passing his fingers through his curls. "You were not far from the feather bed then, mon gal. A little more and this good hostel would have a new window." He bounded back from his perilous foeman, but the other, heated by the bout, rushed madly after him, and so gave the practised wrestler the very vantage for which he had planned. As Big John flung himself upon him, the archer ducked under the great red hands that clutched for him, and, catching his man round the thighs, held him over his shoulder, helped as much by his own mad rush as by the trained strength of the heave. To Elaine's eye, it was as if John had taken unto himself wings and flown. As he hurtled through the air, with giant limbs revolving, the lad's heart was in his mouth, for surely no man ever yet had such a fall and came scathless out of it. "I doubt it not, mon ami," quoth the archer, going back to his tankard. "Here is to thee, lad, and may we be good comrades to each other. But, Ola, what is it that ails our friend of the ruffled face?" The unfortunate limner had been sitting up rubbing himself ruefully and staring about with a vacant gaze, which showed that he knew neither way was nor what had occurred to him. Suddenly, however, a flash of intelligence had come over his sudden features, and he rose and staggered for the door. "Where the ale?" he said in a hoarse whisper, shaking a warning finger at the company. "Oh, Holy Virgin, where the ale?" And slapping his hands to his injury, he flitted off into the darkness, amid a shout of laughter, in which the vanquished joined as merrily as the victor. Chapter 7. How the three comrades journeyed through the woodlands. At early dawn the country was all alive, for it was rare indeed that an hour of daylight would be wasted at a time when lighting was so scarce and dear. Indeed, early as it was when Dame Eliza began to stir, it seemed that others could be earlier still, for the door was ajar, and the learned student of Cambridge had taken himself off, with a mind which was too intent upon the high things of antiquity to stoop to consider the fourpence which he owed for bed and board. It was the shrill outcry of the landlady when she found her loss, and the clucking of the hens, which had streamed in through the open door, that first broke in upon the slumbers of the tired wayfarers. "Hola, my man of peace," he cried to Alleyne, "whither are you bent this morning?" "To Minstead," quoth he. "My brother Simon Edricson is sockman there, and I go to bide with him for a while. I pry thee, let me have my score, good dame." "And see the red eye of it," cried the maid. "Aye, and the open beak, and the ruffled wing, Edid Hoddlejohn. By my hilt," cried the archer, "it is the very bird itself." The young clerk flushed with pleasure at this chorus of praise, rude and indiscriminate indeed, and yet so much heartier and less grudging than any which he had ever heard from the critical brother Jerome or the short-spoken abbot. There was, it would seem, great kindness as well as great wickedness in this world, of which he had heard so little that was good. His hostess would hear nothing of his paying either for bed or for board, while the archer and Hoddlejohn placed a hand upon either shoulder, and led him off to the board, where some smoking fish, a dish of spinach, and a jug of milk were laid out for their breakfast. "I should not be surprised to learn, mon camarade," said the soldier, as he heaped a slice of fish upon Alleyne's tranquil bread, "that you could read written things, since you are so ready with your brushes and pigments." "It would be shame to the good brothers of Beaulieu if I could not," he answered, "seeing that I have been their clerk this 10 years back." The bowman looked at him with great respect. "Think of that," said he, "and you with not a hair to your face, and a skin like a girl. I can shoot 350 paces with my little popper there, and 420 with a great war bow. Yet I can make nothing of this, nor read my own name if you were to set Sam Elwood up against me." In the whole company there was only one man who could read, and he fell down a well at the taking of Ventadour, which proves that a thing is not suited to a soldier, though most needful to a clerk. "I can make some show at it," said Big John, "though I was scarce long enough among the monks to catch the whole trick of it." "Hey, then, is something to try upon," quoth the archer, pulling a square of parchment from the inside of his tunic. It was tied securely with a broad band of purple silk, and firmly sealed at either end with a large red seal. John pored long and earnestly over the inscription upon the back, with his brows bent as one who bears up against great mental strain. "Not having read much of late," he said, "I am loath to say too much about what this may be. Some might say one thing and some another. Just as one bowman loves a ewe, and a second will not shoot save with the ash. To me, by the length and the look of it, I should judge this to be a verse from one of the Psalms." The bowman shook his head. "It is scarce likely," he said, "that Sir Claude Latier should send me all the way across seas with naught more weighty than a psalm verse. You have clean overshot the butts this time, mon camarade. Give it to the little one. I will wager my feather bed that he makes more sense of it." "Why, it is written in the French tongue," said Alleyne, "and in a right clerkly hand. This is how it runs. A le mote puissant et mote honorable chevalier, Sir Nigel Loin de Christchurch, de Suntrays Fidel Sir Claude Latour, Capitaine de la Compagnie Blanche, Chatelaine de Biscay, Grand Seigneur de Montchateau, Vavasseur de la Renomme Gaston, Comte de Foy, Tenant les Droits de la Haute Justice, de la Milieu, et de la Basse. Which signifies in our speech, to the very powerful and very honourable knight, Sir Nigel Loing of Christchurch, from his very faithful friend Sir Claude Latier, Captain of the White Company, Chatelaine of Biscay, Grand Lord of Montchateau and vassal to the renowned Gaston, Count of Foy, who holds the right to the high justice, the middle and the low." "Look at that now," cried the bowman in triumph. "That is just what he would have said." "I can see now that it is even so," said John, examining the parchment again, "though I scarce understand this high, middle, and low. By my hilt, you would understand it if you were Jacques Bonhomme. The low justice means that you may fleece him, and the middle that you may torture him, and the high that you may slay him. That is about the truth of it. But this is the letter which I am to take, and since the platter is clean, it is time that we trussed up and were afoot. You come with me, mon gros Jean, and as to you, little one, where did you say that you journeyed? To Minstead. Ah, yes, I know this forest country well, though I was born myself in the 100 of Easebourne, in the rape of Chichester, hard by the village of Midhurst. Yet I have not a word to say against the Hampton men, for there are no better comrades or true archers in the whole company than some who learn to loose the string in these very parts. We shall travel round with you to Minstead, lad, seeing that it is little out of our way. I am ready, said Alleyne, right pleased at the thought of such company upon the road. So am not I. I must store my plunder at this inn, since the hostess is an honest woman. Hola, ma chérie, I wish to leave with you my gold work, my velvet, my silk, my feather bed, my incense boat, my ewer, my naping linen, and all the rest of it. I take only the money in a linen bag, and the box of rose-colored sugar, which is a gift from my captain to the Lady Loring. Will guard my treasure for me. It shall be put in the safest loft. Good archer, come when you may, you shall find it ready for you. Now, there's a true friend, cried the bowman, taking a hand. There's a born Amy, English land and English women, say I, and French wine and French plunder. I shall be back anon, mon Angie. I am a lonely man, my sweeting, and I must settle some day when the wars are over and done. Mayhap you and I, machante, there is la petite peeping from behind the door. Now, John, the sun is over the trees. You must be brisker than this when the bugle-man blows bows and bills. I have been waiting this time back, said Hoardle John gruffly. Then we must be off. Adieu, ma vie. The 2 levers shall settle the score and buy some ribbons against the next kermesse. Do not forget Sam Aylward, for his heart shall ever be thine alone, and thine, ma petite. So, Martians, and may Street Julian grant us as good quarters elsewhere. The sun had risen over Ashurst and Denny Woods, and was shining brightly, though the eastern wind had a sharp flavor to it, and the leaves were flickering thickly from the trees. In the high street of Lyndhurst the wayfarers had to pick their way, for the little town was crowded with the guardsmen, grooms, and yeoman prickers who were attached to the king's hunt. The king himself was staying at Castle Melwood, but several of his suite had been compelled to seek such quarters as they might find in the wooden or wattle-and-daub cottages of the village. Here and there a small escutcheon, peeping from a glass's window, marked the knight's lodging of knight or baron. These coats of arms could be read, where a scroll would be meaningless, and the bowman, like most men of his age, was well versed in the common symbols of heraldry. There is the Saracen's head of Sir Bernard Brocas, quoth he. I saw him last at the ruffle at Poictiers some 10 years back, when he bore himself like a man. He is the master of the king's horse, and can sing a right jovial stave, though in that he cannot come nigh to Sir John Chandos, who is first at the board or in the saddle. 3 martlets on a field azure, that must be one of the Luttrells, by the crescent upon it. It should be the second son of old Sir Hugh, who had a bowl through his ankle at the intaking of Romorantin, he having rushed into the fray ere his squire had time to clasp his soleret to his greave. There too is the hackle, which is the old device of the de Brays. I have served under Sir Thomas de Bray, who was as jolly as a pie, and a lusty swordsman until he got too fat for his harness. So the archer gossiped as the 3 wayfarers threaded their way among the stamping horses, the busy grooms, and the knots of pages and squires who disputed over the merits of their masters' horses and deerhounds. As they passed the old church, which stood upon a mound at the left-hand side of the village street, the door was flung open, and a stream of worshippers wound down the sloping path, coming from the morning mass, all chattering like a cloud of jays. Alleyne bent knee and doffed hat at the sight of the open door, but ere he had finished an ave, his comrades were out of sight round the curve of the path, and he had to run to overtake them. What? He said, not one word of prayer before God's own open house. How can ye hope for his blessing upon the day? My friend, said Hoddle John. "I have prayed so much during the last 2 months, not only during the day, but at matins, lords, and the like, when I could scarce keep my head upon my shoulders for nodding, that I feel that I have somewhat overprayed myself." "How can a man have too much religion?" cried Alleyne earnestly. "It is the one thing that availeth. A man is but a beast as he lives from day to day, eating and drinking, breathing and sleeping. It is only when he raises himself, and concerns himself with the immortal spirit within him, that he becomes in very truth a man. Bethink ye how sad a thing it would be that the blood of the Redeemer should be spilled to no purpose. Bless the lad, if he doth not blush like any girl, and yet preach like the whole college of cardinals," cried the archer. "In truth I blush that any one so weak and so unworthy as I should try to teach another that which he finds it so passing hard to follow himself." Prettily said, Mon Garcon. Touching that same slaying of the Redeemer, it was a bad business. A good padre in France read to us from a scroll the whole truth of the matter. The soldiers came upon him in the garden. In truth, these apostles of his may have been holy men, but they were of no great account as men-at-arms. There was one, indeed, Sir Peter, who smote out like a true man. But, unless he is belied, he did but clip a varlet's ear, which was no very knightly deed. By these 10 finger bones, had I been there with Black Simon of Norwich, and but 1 picked men of the company, we had held them in play. Could we do no more? We had at least filled the false knight, Sir Judas, so full of English arrows that he would curse the day that ever he came on such an errand. The young clerk smiled at his companion's earnestness. Had he wished help, he said, he could have summoned legions of archangels from heaven. So what need had he of your poor bow and arrow? Besides, bethink you of his own words, that those who live by the sword shall perish by the sword. And how could man die better? Asked the archer. If I had my wish, it would be to fall so, not, mark you, in any mere skirmish of the company, but in a stricken field, with a great lion banner waving over us and the red oriflamme in front, amid the shouting of my fellows and the twanging of the strings. But let it be sword, lance, or bolt that strikes me down, for I should think it shame to die from an iron ball from the fire-crake or bombard, or any such unsoldierly weapon, which is only fitted to scare babes with its foolish noise and smoke. All along the woodland track there did indeed run a scattered straggling trail of blood marks, sometimes in single drops, and in other places in broad, ruddy gouts, smudged over the dead leaves or crimsoning the white flint stones. "It must be a stricken deer," said John. "Nay, I am woodman enough to see that no deer hath passed this way this morning, and yet the blood is fresh. But hark to the sound." They stood listening all three with sidelong heads. Through the silence of the great forest there came a swishing, whistling sound, mingled with the most dolorous groans, and the voice of a man raised in a high quavering kind of song. The comrades hurried onwards eagerly, and topping the brow of a small rising they saw upon the other side the source from which these strange noises arose. A tall man, much stooped in the shoulders, was walking slowly with bended head and clasped hands in the center of the path. He was dressed from head to foot in a long white linen cloth, and a high white cap with a red cross printed upon it. His gown was turned back from his shoulders, and the flesh there was a sight to make a man wince, for it was all beaten to a pulp, and the blood was soaking into his gown and trickling down upon the ground. Behind him walked a smaller man with his head touched with grey, who was clad in the same white garb. Such a spectacle was new to Hoddle John or to Alleyne Edricson, but the archer treated it lightly, as a common matter enough. "These are the beating friars, otherwise called the flagellants," quoth he. "I marvel that ye should have come upon none of them before, for across the water they are as common as gallybaggers. I have heard that there are no English among them, but that they are from France, Italy, and Bohemia. En avant, camarades, that we may have speech with them." Then at the end of the verse the scourge changed hands, and the chanting began anew. "Truly, holy fathers," said the archer in French as they came abreast of them, "you are beaten enough for today. The road is all spotted like a shambles at Martinmas. Why should ye mishandle yourselves thus? C'est pour vos pecs, They droned, looking at the travellers with sad lackluster eyes, and then bent to their bloody work once more without heed to the prayers and persuasions which were addressed to them. Finding all remonstrance useless, the three comrades hastened on their way, leaving these strange travellers to their dreary task. "Mort d'ailleurs," cried the bowman. "There's a bucketful more of my blood over in France, but it was all spilled in hot fight, and I should think twice before I drew it drop by drop as these friars are doing. By my hilt, our young one here is as white as a Picari cheese. What is amiss then, mon cher?" "It is nothing," Alleyne answered. "My life has been too quiet. I am not used to such sights." "Mal have I," the other cried. "I have never yet seen men who were so stout of speech and yet so weak of heart." "Not so, friend," quoth Big John. "It is not weakness of heart, for I know the lad well. His heart is as good as thine or mine, but he hath more in his pate than ever you will carry under that tin pot of thine, and as a consequence he can see farther into things, so that they weigh upon him more." "Surely to any man it is a sad sight," said Alleyne, "to see these holy men, who have done no sin themselves, suffering so for the sins of others. Saints are they, if in this age any may merit so high a name." "By the three kings, there is sooth in what you say," remarked the archer. "Besides, methinks if I were Le Bon Dayou, it would bring me little joy to see a poor devil cutting the flesh off his bones, and I should think that he had but a small opinion of me, that he should hope to please me by such provost-martial work. No, by my hilt, I should look with a more loving eye upon a jolly archer who never harmed a fallen foe and never feared a hale one. It is for this that these men mortify their flesh, and to set us an example, who would pamper ourselves overmatch. I say again that they are God's own saints, and I bow my head to them." "And so you shall, mon petit," replied the archer. "I have not heard a man speak better since old Dom Bertrand died, who was at one time chaplain to the White Company. He was a very valiant man, but at the Battle of Brignais he was spitted through the body by a Hainaut man-at-arms. For this we had an excommunication read against the man, when next we saw our Holy Father at Avignon. But as we had not his name, and knew nothing of him, save that he rode a dapple grey Roussan, I have feared sometimes that the blight may have settled upon the wrong man." "Your company has been, then, to Boney before our Holy Father, the Pope Urban, the prop and centre of Christendom?" asked Alleyne, much interested. "Perchance you have yourself set eyes upon his august face." "Twice I saw him," said the archer. "He was a lean little rat of a man, with a scab on his chin. The first time we had 5,000 crowns out of him, though he made much ado about it. The second time we asked 10,000, but it was 3 days before we could come to terms, and I am of opinion myself that we might have done better by plundering the palace. His chamberlain and cardinals came forth, as I remember, to ask whether we would take 7,000 crowns with his blessing and a plenary absolution, or the 10,000 with his solemn ban by bell, book, and candle. We were all of one mind that it was best to have the 10,000 with the coast, but in some way they prevailed upon Sir John, so that we were blessed and shriven against our will. Perchance it is as well, for the company were in need of it about that time." The pious Alleyne was deeply shocked by this reminiscence. Involuntarily he glanced up and around to see if there were any trace of those opportune levin flashes and thunderbolts which, in the actus sanctorum, were wont so often to cut short the loose talk of the scoffer. The autumn sun streamed down as brightly as ever, and the peaceful red path still wound in front of them through the rustling, yellow-tinted forest. Nature seemed to be too busy with her own concerns to heed the dignity of an outraged pontiff. Yet he felt a sense of weight and reproach within his breast, as though he had sinned himself in giving ear to such words. The teachings of 20 years cried out against such license. It was not until he had thrown himself down before one of the many wayside crosses, and had prayed from his heart both for the archer and for himself, that the dark cloud rolled back again from his spirit. Chapter 8. The Three Friends. His companions had passed on whilst he was at his orisons, but his young blood and the fresh morning air both invited him to a scamper. His staff in one hand and his scrip in the other, with springy step and floating locks, he raced along the forest path, as active and as graceful as a young deer. He had not far to go, however, for, on turning a corner, he came on a roadside cottage with a wooden fence-work around it, where stood Big John and Elwood the bowman, staring at something within. As he came up with them, he saw that two little lads, the one about 9 years of age and the other somewhat older, were standing on the plot in front of the cottage, each holding out a round stick in their left hands, with their arms stiff and straight from the shoulder, as silent and still as two small statues. They were pretty, blue-eyed, yellow-haired lads, well-made and sturdy, with bronze skins which spoke of a woodland life. "Here are young chips from an old bow stave," cried the soldier in great delight. "This is the proper way to raise children. By my hilt, I could not have trained them better had I the ordering of it myself." "What is it then?" asked Caudle John. "They stand very stiff, and I trust that they have not been struck so." "Nay, they are training their left arms, that they may have a steady grasp of the bow. So my own father trained me, and 6 days a week I held out his walking staff till my arm was heavy as lead. Hola, mes enfants, how long will you hold out?" "Until the sun is over the great lime tree, good master," the elder answered. "What would you be, then? Woodmen? Verderers?" "Nay, soldiers," they cried both together. "By the beard of my father, but ye are whelps of the true breed. Why so keen, then, to be soldiers?" "That we may fight the Scots," they answered. "Daddy will send us to fight the Scots." "And why the Scots, my pretty lads? We have seen French and Spanish galleys no further away than Southampton, but I doubt that it will be some time before the Scots find their way to these parts." "Our business is with the Scots," quoth the elder, "for it was the Scots who cut off Daddy's string fingers and his thumbs." "Aye, lads, it was that," said a deep voice from behind Alleyne's shoulder. Looking round, the wayfarers saw a gaunt, big-boned man, with sunken cheeks and a sallow face, who had come up behind them. He held up his 2 hands as he spoke, and showed that the thumbs and 2 first fingers had been torn away from each of them. "My foi, camarade," cried Aylward, "who has served thee in so shameful a fashion? It is easy to see, friend, that you were born far from the marches of Scotland," quoth the stranger, with a bitter smile. "North of Humber there is no man who would not know the handiwork of Devil Douglas, the Black Lord James." "And how fell you into his hands?" asked John. "I am a man of the North Country, from the town of Beverley and the wapentake of Holdowes," he answered. "There was a day when, from Trent to Tweed, there was no better marksman than Robin Heathcote. Yet, as you see, he hath left me, as he hath left many another poor border archer, with no grip for bill or bow. Yet the king hath given me a living here in the Southlands, and please God these 2 lads of mine will pay off a debt that have been owing over long. What is the price of Daddy's thumbs, boys?" 20 Scottish lives," they answered together. "And for the fingers, 50 score. When they can bend my war bow and bring down a squirrel at 100 paces, I send them to take service under Johnny Copeland, the Lord of the Marches and Governor of Carlisle. By my soul, I would give the rest of my fingers to see the Douglas within arrow flight of them." "May you live to see it," quoth the bowman. "And hark ye, mes enfants, take an old soldier's reed and lay your bodies to the bow, drawing from hip and thigh as much as from arm. Learn also, I pray you, to shoot with a dropping shaft. For though a bowman may at times be called upon to shoot straight and fast, yet it is more often that he has to do with a town guard behind a wall, or an arbalestier with his mantlet raised when you cannot hope to do him scathe unless your shaft falls straight upon him from the clouds. I have not drawn string for 2 weeks, but I may be able to show ye how such shots should be made." He loosened his longbow, slung his quiver round to the front, and then glanced keenly round for a fitting mark. There was a yellow and withered stump some way off, seen under the drooping branches of a lofty oak. The archer measured the distance with his eye, and then, drawing 3 shafts, he shot them off with such speed that the first had not reached the mark ere the last was on the string. Each arrow passed high over the oak, and, of the 3, 2 stuck fair into the stump, while the third, caught in some wandering puff of wind, was driven a foot or 2 to one side. "Good," cried the North countryman. "Hearken to him, lads. He is a master bowman. Your dad says amen to every word he says." "By my hilt," said Aylward, "if I am to preach on bowmanship, the whole long day would scarce give me time for my sermon. We have marksmen in the company who will notch with a shaft every crevice and joint of a men-at-arms harness, from the clasp of his bassinet to the hinge of his greave. But, with your favour, friend, I must gather my arrows again, for while a shaft costs a penny, a poor man can scarce leave them sticking in wayside stumps. We must, then, on our road again, and I hope from my heart that you may train these two young goshawks here until they are ready for a cast even at such a quarry as you speak of. Leaving the thumbless archer and his brood, the wayfarers struck through the scattered huts of Emery Down, and out on to the broad rolling heath covered deep in ferns and in heather, where droves of the half-wild black forest pigs were rooting about amongst the hillocks. The woods about this point fall away to the left and the right, while the road curves upwards and the wind sweeps keenly over the swelling uplands. The broad strips of bracken glowed red and yellow against the black peaty soil, and a queenly doe who grazed among them turned her white front and her great questioning eyes towards the wayfarers. Alleyne gazed in admiration at the supple beauty of the creature. But the archer's fingers played with his quiver, and his eyes glistened with the fell instinct which urges a man to slaughter. Tet dayu, he growled. With his France, or even Guienne, we should have a fresh haunch for our nun-meat. Law or no law, I have a mind to loose a bolt at her. I would break your stave across my knee first, cried John, laying his great hand upon the bow. What? Man, I am forest-born, and I know what comes of it. In our own township of Hordle, two have lost their eyes, and one his skin for this very thing. On my troth, I felt no great love when I first saw you, but since then I conceived over much regard for you to wish to see the verdurer's flare at work upon you. It is my trade to risk my skin, growled the archer, but none the less he thrust his quiver over his hip again and turned his face for the west. As they advanced, the path still tended upwards, running from heath into copses of holly and yew, and so back into heath again. It was joyful to hear the merry whistle of blackbirds as they darted from one clump of greenery to the other. Now and again a peaty amber-colored stream rippled across their way, with ferny overgrown banks, where the blue kingfisher flitted busily from side to side, or the grey and pensive heron, swollen with trout and dignity, stood ankle-deep among the sedges. Chattering jays and loud wood-pigeons flapped thickly overhead, while ever and anon the mad tapping of nature's carpenter, the great green woodpecker, sounded from each wayside grove. On either side, as the path mounted, the long sweep of country broadened and expanded, sloping down on the one side through yellow forest and brown moor to the distant smoke of Lymington and the blue misty channel, which lay alongside the skyline, while to the north the woods rolled away, grove topping grove, to where in the furthest distance the white spire of Salisbury stood out hard and clear against the cloudless sky. To Alleyne, whose days had been spent in the low-lying coastland, the eager upland air and the wide, free countryside gave a sense of life and of the joy of living which made his young blood tingle in his veins. Even the heavy John was not unmoved by the beauty of their road, while the bowmen whistled lustily or sang snatches of French love songs in a voice which might have scared the most stout-hearted maiden that ever hearkened to serenade. I have a liking for that north countryman, he remarked presently. He hath good power of hatred. Could see by his cheek and eye that he is as bitter as verjuice. I warm to a man who has some gall in his liver. Ah me, sighed Alleyne. Would it not be better if he had some love in his heart? I would not say nay to that. By my hilt, I shall never be said to be traitor to the little king. Let a man love the sex. Pasque dayu. They are made to be loved, les petites, from wimple down to shoestring. I am right glad, mon garcon, to see that the good monks have trained thee so wisely and so well. Nay, I meant not worldly love, but rather that his heart should soften towards those who have wronged him. The archer shook his head. A man should love those of his own breed, said he, but it is not nature that an English-born man should love a Scot or a Frenchman. Mouth foi, you have not seen a drove of Nithsdale raiders on their Galloway nags, or you would not speak of loving them. I would as soon take Beelzebub himself to my arms. I fear, mon gal, that they have taught thee but badly at Beaulieu, for surely a bishop knows more of what is right and what is all that an abbot can do, and I myself with these very eyes saw the Bishop of Lincoln hew into a Scottish hobbler with a battle-axe, which was a passing strange way of showing him that he loved him. Alleyne scarce saw his way to argue in the face of so decided an opinion on the part of a high dignitary of the church. You have borne arms against the Scots? Then, he asked, why, man, I first loosed string in battle when I was but a lad, younger by 2 years than you, at Neville's Cross, under the Lord Mowbray. Later, I served under the Warden of Berwick, that very John Copeland of whom our friend spake, the same who held the King of Scots to ransom. Mauve, it is rough soldiering, and a good school for one who would learn to be hardy and war-wise. I have heard that the Scots are good men of war, said Hoardle John. For axemen and for spearmen I have not seen their match. The archer answered, they can travel, too, with bag of meal and gridiron slung to their sword belt, so that it is ill to follow them. There are scant crops and few beeves in the borderland, where a man must reap his grain with sickle in one fist and brown bill in the other. On the other hand, they are the sorriest archers that I have ever seen, and cannot so much as aim with the arbalist, to say naught of the longbow. Again, they are mostly poor folk, even the nobles among them, so that there are few who can buy as good a brigandine of chainmail as that which I am wearing, and it is ill for them to stand up against our own knights, who carry the price of 5 Scotch farms upon their chest and shoulders. Man for man, with equal weapons, they are as worthy and valiant men as could be found in the whole of Christendom. And the French? Asked Alleyne, to whom the archer's light gossip had all the relish that the words of the man of action have for the recluse. The French are also very worthy men. We have had great good fortune in France, and it has led to much bobance and campfire talk, but I have ever noticed that those who know the most have the least to say about it. I have seen Frenchmen fight both in open field, in the intaking and the defending of towns or castlewicks, in escalados, camisades, night forays, bushments, sallies, outfalls, and nightly spear-runnings. Their knights and squires, lad, are every whit as good as ours, and I could pick out a score of those who ride behind Du Guesclin who would hold a list with sharpened lances against the best men in the army of England. On the other hand, their common folk are so crushed down with gebel and poll tax, and every manner of cursed tallage, that the spirit has passed right out of them. It is a fool's plan to teach a man to be a cur in peace, and think that he will be a lion in war. Fleece them like sheep, and sheep they will remain. If the nobles had not conquered the poor folk, it is like enough that we should not have conquered the nobles. But they must be sorry folk to bow down to the rich in such a fashion, said Big John. I am but a poor commoner of England myself, and yet I know something of charters, liberties, franchises, usages, privileges, customs, and the like. If these be broken, then all men know that it is time to buy arrowheads. Aye, but the men of the law are strong in France as well as the men of war. By my hilt, I hold that a man has more to fear there from the inkpot of the one than from the iron of the other. There is ever some cursed sheepskin in their strong boxes to prove that the rich man should be richer and the poor man poorer. It would scarce pass in England, but they are quiet folk over the water. And the men of Spain, they too are very hardy soldiers, the more so as for many 100 years they have had to fight hard against the cursed followers of the Black Mahound, who are pressed upon them from the south, and still, as I understand, hold the fairer half of the country. I had a turn with them upon the sea when they came over to win Chelsea, and the good queen with her ladies sat upon the cliffs looking down at us, as if it had been joust or tourney. By my hilt, it was a sight that was worth the seeing, for all that was best in England was out on the water that day. We went forth in little ships and came back in great galleys. For 50 tall ships of Spain, over 200 flew the cross of St. George ere the sun had set. Nay, said Alleyne, I would gladly come with ye to France or where else ye will, just to listen to your talk, and because ye are the only 2 friends that I have in the whole wide world outside of the cloisters. But, indeed, it may not be, for my duty is towards my brother, seeing that father and mother are dead, and he my elder. Besides, when ye talk of taking me to France, ye do not conceive how useless I should be to you, seeing that neither by training nor by nature am I fitted for the wars, and there seems to be naught but strife in those parts. That comes from my fool's talk, cried the archer, for being a man of no learning myself, my tongue turns to blades and targets, even as my hand does. Know then that for every parchment in England there are 20 in France. For every statue, cut gem, shrine, carving screen, or what else might please the eye of a learned clerk, there are a good 100 to our one. At the spoiling of Carcassonne I have seen chambers stored with writing, though not one man in our company could read them. Again, in Arles and Nimes, and other towns I could name, there are the great arches and fortalices still standing which were built of old by giant men who came from the south. Can I not see by your Brighton how you would love to look upon these things? Come then with me, and by these 10 finger bones, there is not one of them which you shall not see. I should indeed love to look upon them, Alleyne answered, but I have come from Beaulieu for a purpose, and I must be true to my service, even as thou art true to thine. Bethink you again, mon ami, quoth Aylward, that you might do much good yonder, since there are 300 men in the company, and none who has ever a word of grace for them, and yet the Virgin knows that there was never a set of men who were in more need of it. Sickly the one duty may balance the other. Your brother hath done without you this many a year, and, as I gather, he hath never walked as far as Beaulieu to see you during all that time, so he cannot be in any great need of you. Besides, said John, the Sockman of Minstead is a byword through the forest, from Bramshaw Hill to Holmesley Walk. He is a drunken, brawling, perilous churl, as you may find to your cost. The more reason that I should strive to mend him, quoth Alleyne. There is no need to urge me, friends, for my own wishes would draw me to France, and it would be a joy to me if I could go with you. But indeed and indeed it cannot be. So here I take my leave of you, for yonder square tower amongst the trees upon the right must surely be the church of Minstead, and I may reach it by this path through the woods. Well, God be with thee, lad, cried the archer, pressing Alleyne to his heart. I am quick to love, and quick to hate, and for God I am loath to part. Would it not be well, said John, that we should wait here, and see what manner of greeting you have from your brother? You may prove to be as welcome as the king's purveyor to the village dame. Nay, nay, he answered, you must not bide for me, for where I go I stay. Yet it may be as well that you should know whither we go, said the archer. We shall now journey south through the woods until we come out upon the Christchurch road, and so onwards, hoping tonight to reach the castle of Sir William Montacute, Earl of Salisbury, of which Sir Nigel Loring is constable. There we shall bide, and it is like enough that for a month or more you may find us there, ere we are ready for our voyage back to France. It was hard indeed for Alleyne to break away from these 2 new but hearty friends, and so strong was the combat between his conscience and his inclinations that he dared not look round, lest his resolution should slip away from him. It was not until he was deep among the tree trunks that he cast a glance backwards, when he found that he could still see them through the branches on the road above him. The archer was standing with folded arms, his bow jutting from over his shoulder, and the sun gleaming brightly upon his headpiece and the links of his chainmail. Beside him stood his giant recruit, still clad in the homespun and ill-fitting garments of the Fuller of Lymington, with arms and legs shooting out of his scanty garb. Even as Alleyne watched them, they turned upon their heels and plodded off together upon their way. Chapter 9. How strange things befell in Minstead Wood. The path which the young clerk had now to follow lay through a magnificent forest of the very heaviest timber, where the giant boles of oak and of beech formed long aisles in every direction, shooting up their huge branches to build the majestic arches of nature's own cathedral. Beneath lay a broad carpet of the softest and greenest moss, flecked over with fallen leaves, but yielding pleasantly to the foot of the traveller. The track which guided him was one so seldom used that in places it lost itself entirely among the grass, to reappear as a reddish rip between the distant tree trunks. It was very still here in the heart of the woodlands. The gentle rustle of the branches and the distant cooing of pigeons were the only sounds which broke upon the silence, save that once Alleyne heard afar off a merry call upon a hunting bugle and the shrill yapping of the hounds. It was not without some emotion that he looked upon the scene around him, for, in spite of his secluded life, he knew enough of the ancient greatness of his own family to be aware that the time had been when they had held undisputed and paramount sway over all that tract of country. His father could trace his pure Saxon lineage back to that Godfrey Malf who had held the manors of Bisterne and of Minstead at the time when the Norman first set mail foot upon English soil. The afforestation of the district, however, and its conversion into a royal domain had clipped off a large section of his estate, while other parts had been confiscated as a punishment for his supposed complicity in an abortive Saxon rising. The fate of the ancestor had been typical of that of his descendants. During 300 years their domains had gradually contracted, sometimes through royal or feudal encroachment, and sometimes through such gifts to the church as that with which Alleyne's father had opened the doors of Beaulieu Abbey to his younger son. The importance of the family had thus dwindled, but they still retained the old Saxon manor house, with a couple of farms and a grove large enough to afford pannage to 100 pigs, silver descentum horses, as the old family parchments describe it. Above all, the owner of the soil could still hold his head high as the veritable Sockman of Minstead, that is, as holding the land in free soccage, with no feudal superior, and answerable to no man lower than the king. Knowing this, Alleyne felt some little glow of worldly pride as he looked for the first time upon the land with which so many generations of his ancestors had been associated. He pushed on the quicker, twirling his staff merrily, and looking out at every turn of the path for some sign of the old Saxon residence. He was suddenly arrested, however, by the appearance of a wild-looking fellow armed with a club, who sprang out from behind a tree and barred his passage. He was a rough, powerful peasant, with cap and tunic of untanned sheepskin, leather breeches, and galligaskins round legs and feet. "Stand," he shouted, raising his heavy cudgel to enforce the order. "Who are you who walk so freely through the wood? Whither would you go, and what is your errand?" "Why should I answer your questions, my friend?" said Alleyne, standing on his guard. "Because your tongue may save your pate. But where have I looked upon your face before?" "No longer ago than last night at the Pied Merlin," the clerk answered, recognizing the escaped serf who had been so outspoken as to his wrongs. "By the Virgin, yes, you were the little clerk who sat so mum in the corner, and then cried of why on the gleeman. What is in the script? Naught of any price. How can I tell that, clerk? Let me see. Not I. Fool, I could pull you limb from limb like a pullet. What would you have? Us forgot that we are alone far from all men? How can your clerkship help you? Wouldst lose scrip and life too? I will part with neither without fight. A fight, quotha? A fight betwixt spurred cock and new-hatched chicken. Thy fighting days may soon be over. Hadst asked me in the name of charity, I would have given freely, cried Alleyne. As it stands, not one farthing shall you have of my free will. And when I see my brother, the Sockman of Minstead, he will raise hue and cry from ville to ville, from hundred to hundred, until you are taken as a common robber and a scourge to the country. The outlaw sank his club. The Sockman's brother, he gasped, now, by the keys of Peter, I had rather that hand withered and tongue was palsied ere I had struck or miscalled you. If you are the Sockman's brother, you are one of the right side, I warrant, for all your clerkly dress. Is brother I am, said Alleyne, but if I were not, is that reason why you should molest me on the king's ground? I give not the pip of an apple for king or for noble, cried the serf passionately. Ill have I had from them, and ill I shall repay them. I am a good friend to my friends, and, by the Virgin, an evil foeman to my foes. And therefore the worst of foemen to thyself, said Alleyne, but I pray you, since you seem to know him, to point out to me the shortest path to my brother's house. Alleyne was still gazing after them, listening to the loud Haike Beard, Haike Pommers, Haike Elabrit, with which they called upon their favorite hounds, when a group of horsemen crashed out through the underwood at the very spot where the serf and he was standing. The one who led was a man between 50 and 60 years of age, war-worn and weather-beaten, with a broad, thoughtful forehead and eyes which shone brightly from under his face and overhung brows. His beard, streaked thickly with gray, bristled forward from his chin, and spoke of a passionate nature, while the long, finely cut face and firm mouth marked the leader of men. His figure was erect and soldierly, and he rode his horse with the careless grace of a man whose life had been spent in the saddle. In common garb, his masterful face and fleshing, I would have marked him as one who was born to rule. But now, with his silken tunic powdered with golden fleur-de-lis, his velvet mantle lined with the royal minever, and the lions of England stamped in silver upon his harness, none could fail to recognize the noble Edward, most warlike and powerful of all the long line of fighting monarchs who had ruled the Anglo-Norman race. Alleyne doffed hat and bowed head at the sight of him, but the Sir folded his hands and leaned them upon his cudgel, looking with little love at the knot of nobles and knights-in-waiting who rode behind the king. "How?" cried Edward, reining up for an instant his powerful black steed. "Le surface pass? None? I say I, brocas, two pals anglais." "The day? Clowns," said a hard-visaged, swarthy-faced man, who rode at the king's elbow. "If ye have headed it back, it is as much as your ease are worth." "It passed by the blighted beach there," said Alleyne, pointing, "and the hounds were hard at its heels." "It is well," cried Edward, still speaking in French, for, though he could understand English, he had never learned to express himself in so barbarous and unpolished a tongue. "By my faith, sirs," he continued, half turning in his saddle to address his escort, "unless my woodcraft is sadly at fault, it is a stag of 6 tines and the finest that we have roused this journey. A golden St. Hubert to the man who is the first to sound the mort." He shook his bridle as he spoke, and thundered away, his knights lying low upon their horses and galloping as hard as whip and spur would drive them, in the hope of winning the king's prize. Away they drove down the long green glade. Bay horses, black and grey, riders clad in every shade of velvet, fur, or silk, with glint of brazen horn and flash of knife and spear. One only lingered, the black-browed Baron Brocas, who, making a gambad which brought him within arm sweep of the serf, slashed him across the face with his riding whip. "Duff, dog, duff," he hissed, "when a monarch deigns to lower his eyes to such as you." Then spurred through the underwood and was gone, with a gleam of steel shoes and flutter of dead leaves. The villein took the cruel blow without wince or cry, as one to whom stripes are a birthright and an inheritance. His eyes flashed, however, and he shook his bony hand with a fierce wild gesture after the retreating figure. "Black hound of Gascony," he muttered, "evil the day that you and those like you set foot in free England. I know thy kennel of Rushcourt. The night will come when I may do to thee and thine what you and your class have wrought upon mine and me. May God smite me if I fail to smite thee, thou French robber, with thy wife and thy child and all that is under thy castle roof." "Forbay," cried Alleyne, "mix not God's name with these unhallowed threats." And yet it was a coward's blow, and one to stir the blood and loose the tongue of the most peaceful. Let me find some soothing simples, and lay them on the wheel to draw the sting. Nay, there is but one thing that can draw the sting, and that the future may bring to me. But, Clark, if you would see your brother, you must on, for there is a meeting today, and his merry men will await him as the shadows turn from west to east. I pray you not to hold him back, for it would be an evil thing if all the stout lads were there and the leader a missing. I would come with you, but sooth to say I am stationed here and may not move. The path over yonder, betwixt the oak and the thorn, should bring you out into his nether field." Alleyne lost no time in following the directions of the wild, masterless man, whom he left among the trees where he had found him. His heart was the heavier for the encounter, not only because all bitterness and wrath were abhorrent to his gentle nature, but also because it disturbed him to hear his brother spoken of as though he were a chief of outlaws or the leader of a party against the state. Indeed, of all the things which he had seen yet in the world to surprise him, there was none more strange than the hate which class appeared to bear to class. The talk of labourer, woodman, and villein in the inn had all pointed to the widespread mutiny, and now his brother's name was spoken as though he were the very centre of the universal discontent. In good truth, the commons throughout the length and breadth of the land were heart-weary of this fine game of chivalry which had been played so long at their expense. So long as knight and baron were a strength and a guard to the kingdom, they might be endured. But now, when all men knew that the great battles in France had been won by English yeomen and Welsh-stabbers, warlike fame, the only fame to which his class had ever aspired, appeared to have deserted the plate-clad horsemen. The sports of the lists had done much in days gone by to impress the minds of the people, but the plumed and unwieldy champion was no longer an object either of fear or reverence to men whose fathers and brothers had shot into the press at Crécy or Poitiers, and seen the proudest chivalry in the world unable to make head against the weapons of disciplined peasants. Power had changed hands. The protector had become the protected, and the whole fabric of the feudal system was tottering to a fall. Hence the fierce mutterings of the lower classes and the constant discontent, breaking out into local tumult and outrage, and culminating some years later in the Great Rising of Tyler. What Alleyne saw and wondered in Hampshire would have appealed equally to the traveller in any other English county, from a Channel to the marches of Scotland. He was following the track, his misgivings increasing with every step which took him nearer to that home which he had never seen, when of a sudden the trees began to thin and the sward to spread out onto a broad, green lawn, where 5 cows lay in the sunshine and droves of black swine wandered unchecked. A brown forest stream swirled down the center of this clearing, with a rude bridge flung across it, and on the other side was a second field sloping up to a long, low-lying wooden house, with thatched roof and open squares for windows. Alleyne gazed across at it with flushed cheeks and sparkling eyes, for this, he knew, must be the home of his fathers. He was roused, however, from his pleasant reverie by the sound of voices, and 2 people emerged from a forest some little way to his right and moved across the field in the direction of the bridge. The one was a man with yellow flowing beard and very long hair of the same tint drooping over his shoulders. His dress of good Norwich cloth and his assured bearing mark him as a man of position, while the somber hue of his clothes and the absence of all ornament contrasted with the flash and glitter which had marked the king's retinue. By his side walked a woman, tall and slight and dark, with lithe, graceful figure and clear-cut, composed features. Her jet-black hair was gathered back under a light pink coif, her head poised proudly upon her neck, and her step long and springy, like that of some wild, tireless woodland creature. She held her left hand in front of her, covered with a red velvet glove, and on the wrist a little brown falcon, very fluffy and bedraggled, which she smoothed and fondled as she walked. As she came out into the sunshine, Alleyne noticed that a light gown, slashed with pink, was all stained with earth and with moss upon one side from shoulder to hem. He stood in the shadow of an oak staring at her with parted lips, for this woman seemed to him to be the most beautiful and graceful creature that mind could conceive of. Such had he imagined the angels, and such he had tried to paint them in the Beaulieu missals. But here there was something human, were it only in the battered hulk and discolored dress, which sent a tingle and thrill through his nerves such as no dream of radiant and stainless spirit had ever yet been able to conjure up. Good, quiet, uncomplaining Mother Nature, long slighted and miscalled, still bides a time and draws to her bosom the most errant of her children. The 2 walked swiftly across the meadow to the narrow bridge, he in front and she a pace or 2 behind. There they paused, and stood for a few minutes face to face talking earnestly. Alleyne had read and had heard of love and of lovers. Such were these, doubtless, this golden-bearded man and the fair damsel with the cold, proud face. Why else should they wander together in the woods, or be so lost in talk by rustic streams? And yet as he watched, uncertain whether to advance from the cover or to choose some other path to the house, he soon came to doubt the truth of this first conjecture. The man stood, tall and square, blocking the entrance to the bridge, and throwing out his hands as he spoke in a wild, eager fashion, while the deep tones of his stormy voice rose at times into accents of menace and of anger. She stood fearlessly in front of him, still stroking her bird, but twice she threw a swift questioning glance over her shoulder, as one who was in search of aid. So moved was the young clerk by these mute appeals, that he came forth from the trees and crossed the meadow, uncertain what to do, and yet loath to hold back from one who might need his aid. So intent were they upon each other that neither took note of his approach, until, when he was close upon them, the man threw his arm roughly round the damsel's waist and drew her towards him, she straining her lithe, supple figure away and striking fiercely at him, while the hooded hawk screamed with ruffled wings and pecked blindly in its mistress's defense. Bird and maid, however, had but little chance against their assailant who, laughing loudly, caught her wrist in one hand while he drew her towards him with the other. "The best rose is ever the longest thorns," said he. "Quiet, little one, or you may do yourself a hurt. Must pay Saxon toll on Saxon land, my proud Maud, for all your airs and graces." "You boor," she hissed. "You base underbred clod. Is this your care and your hospitality? I would rather wed a branded serf from my father's fields. Leave go, I say. Ah, good youth, heaven has sent you. Make him loose me. By the honor of your mother, I pray you to stand by me and to make this knave loose me." "Stand by you I will, and that blithely," said Alleyne. Surely, sir, you should take shame to hold a damsel against her will. The man turned a face upon him which was lion-like in its strength and in its wrath. With his tangle of golden hair, his fierce blue eyes, and his large, well-marked features, he was the most comely man whom Alleyne had ever seen, and yet there was something so sinister and so fell in his expression that child or beast might well have shrunk from him. His brows were drawn, his cheek flushed, and there was a mad sparkle in his eyes which spoke of a wild, untamable nature. "Young fool," he cried, holding the woman still to his side, though every line of a shrinking figure spoke her abhorrence. "Do you keep your spoon in your own broth? I rede you to go on your way, lest worse befall you. This little wench has come with me, and with me she shall bide." "Liar," cried the woman, and, stooping her head, she suddenly bit fiercely into the broad brown hand which held her. He whipped it back with an oath, while she tore herself free and slipped behind Alleyne, cowering up against him like the trembling leveret who sees the falcon poising for the swoop above him. "Stand off my land," the man said fiercely, heedless of the blood which trickled freely from his fingers. "What have you to do here? By your dress, you should be one of those cursed clerks who overrun the land like vile rats, poking and prying into other men's concerns, too caitiff to fight and too lazy to work. By the rood, if I had my will upon ye, I should nail you upon the abbey doors, as they hang vermin before their holes. Art neither man nor woman, young shaveling. Get thee back to thy fellows ere I lay hands upon you, for your foot is on my land, and I may slay you as a common drawlatch." "Is this your land? Then," gasped Alleyne, "would you dispute it, dog? Would you wish by trick or quibble to juggle me out of these last acres? No, base-born knave, that you have dared this day to stand in the path of one whose race have been the advisers of kings and the leaders of hosts, ere ever this vile crew of Norman robbers came into the land, or such half-blood hounds as you will let loose to preach that the thief should have his booty and the honest man should sin if he strove to win back his own. You are the Sockman of Minstead. That am I, and the son of Edric the Sockman, of the pure blood of Godfrey the Thane, by the only daughter of the house of Uluric, whose forefathers held the White Horse banner at the fatal fight where our shield was broken and our sword shivered. I tell you, Clark, that my folk held this land from Bramshaw Wood to the Ringwood Road, and, by the soul of my father, it will be a strange thing if I am to be bearded upon the little that is left of it. Begone, I say, and meddle not with my affair. If you leave me now, whispered the woman, then shame forever upon your manhood. Surely, sir, said Alleyne, speaking in as persuasive and soothing a way as he could, if your birth is gentle, there is the more reason that your manners should be gentle too. I am well persuaded that you did but jest with this lady, and that you will now permit her to leave your land either alone or with me as a guide, if she should need one, through the wood. As to birth, it does not become me to boast, and there is sooth in what you say as to the unworthiness of clerks, but it is none the less true that I am as well born as you. Dog, cried the furious Sockman, there is no man in the south who can say as much. Yet can I, said Alleyne, smiling, for indeed I also am the son of Edric the Sockman, of the pure blood of Godfrey the Thane, by the only daughter of Uluric of Brockenhurst. Surely, dear brother, he continued, holding out his hand, you have a warmer greeting than this for me. There are but 2 boughs left upon this old Saxon trunk. I, the Sockman, am shorn of my lands that you may snivel Latin and eat bread, for which you never did hands turn. You robbed me first, and now you would come preaching and whining, in search mayhap of another field or 2 for your priestly friends. Knave, my dog shall be set upon you, but meanwhile stand out of my path, and stop me at your peril. As he spoke, he rushed forward, and, throwing the lad to one side, caught the woman's wrist. Alleyne, however, as active as a young deerhound, sprang to her aid and seized her by the other arm, raising his iron-shod staff as he did so. You may say what you will to me, he said between his clenched teeth. It may be no better than I deserve, but, brother or no, I swear by my hopes of salvation that I will break your arm if you do not leave hold of the maid. There was a ring in his voice and a flash in his eyes which promised that the blow would follow quick at the heels of the word. For a moment the blood of the long line of hot-headed thanes was too strong for the soft whisperings of the doctrine of meekness and mercy. He was conscious of a fierce wild thrill through his nerves and throb of mad gladness at his heart, as his real human self burst for an instant the bonds of custom and of teaching which had held it so long. The sockman sprang back, looking to left and to right for some stick or stone which might serve him for weapon, but finding none, he turned and ran at the top of his speed for the house, blowing the while upon a shrill whistle. "Nay, let him come," cried Alleyne. "I shall not budge a foot for him or his dogs." "Come, come," she cried, tugging at his arm. "I know the man. He will kill you. Come, for the Virgin's sake, or for my sake, for I cannot go and leave you here." "This way," the woman whispered in a low, eager voice. "Through the bushes to that forked ash. Do not heed me. I can run as fast as you. I trow. Now into the stream. Right in, over ankles, to throw the dog off, though I think it is but a common cur, like its master." As she spoke, she sprang herself into the shallow stream and ran swiftly up the center of it, with the brown water bubbling over her feet and a hand outstretched toward the clinging branches of bramble or sapling. Alleyne followed close at her heels, with his mind in a whirl at this black welcome and sudden shifting of all his plans and hopes. Yet, grave as were his thoughts, they would still turn to wonder as he looked at the twinkling feet of his guide and saw a lithe figure bend his way in that, dipping under boughs, springing over stones, with a lightness and ease which made it no small task for him to keep up with her. At last, when he was almost out of breath, she suddenly threw herself down upon a mossy bank between two holly bushes and looked ruefully at her own dripping feet and bedraggled skirt. Alleyne, still standing in the stream, glanced down at the graceful pink and white figure, the curve of raven-black hair, and the proud, sensitive face which looked up frankly and confidingly at his own. "We had best on," he said. "He may yet overtake us." "Not so. We are well off his land now, nor can he tell in this great wood which way we have taken. But you had him at your mercy. Why did you not kill him?" "Kill him? My brother?" "I am already sad in heart for what I have done," said he, sitting down on the bank and sinking his face into his hands. "God help me, all that is worse in me seemed to come uppermost. Another instant, and I had smitten him, the son of my own mother, the man whom I have longed to take to my heart. Alas, that I should still be so weak." "Weak!" she exclaimed, raising her black eyebrows. "I do not think that even my father himself, who is a hard judge of manhood, would call you that. But it is, as you may think, so, a very pleasant thing for me to hear that you are grieved at what you have done, and I can but read that we should go back together, and you should make your peace with the sockman by handing back your prisoner. It is a sad thing that so small a thing as a woman should come between two who are of one blood." Simple Alleyne opened his eyes at this little spurt of feminine bitterness. "Nay, lady," said he, "that were worse of all. What man would be so caitiff and thrall as to fail you at your need? I have turned my brother against me, and now, alas, I appear to have given you offense also with my clumsy tongue. But, indeed, lady, I am torn both ways, and can scarce grasp in my mind what is that has befallen. See how his chest heaves, and his dear feathers all awry, the little knight who would not have his lady mishandled." So she prattled on to her hawk, while Alleyne walked by her side, stealing a glance from time to time at this queenly and wayward woman. In silence they wandered together over the velvet turf and on through the broad Minstead woods, where the old lichen-draped beeches threw their circles of black shadow upon the sunlit sward. "You have no wish, then, to hear my story," said she, at last. "If it pleases you to tell it me," he answered. "Oh," she cried, tossing her head, "if it is of so little interest to you, we had best let it bide." "Nay," said he eagerly, "I would fain hear it. You have a right to know it, if you have lost a brother's favor through it. And yet, you are, as I understand, a clerk, so I must think of you as one step further in orders, and make you my father confessor. Know then that this man has been a suitor for my hand, less as I think for my own sweet sake than because he had ambition, and had it on his mind that he might improve his fortunes by dipping into my father's strong box, though the Virgin knows that he would have found little enough therein. My father, however, is a proud man, a gallant knight and tried soldier of the oldest blood, to whom this man's churlish birth and low descent. Oh, lackaday! I had forgot that he was of the same strain as yourself. Nay, trouble not for that, said Alleyne. We are all from good Mother Eve. Small harm, then, but that my horse Troubadour trod with a tender foot upon a sharp stick, rearing and throwing me to the ground. See to my gown, the third that I have befouled within the week. Woe worth me when Agatha the tirewoman sets eyes upon it. And what then, lady? Asked Alleyne. Why, then away ran Troubadour, for belike I spurred him in falling, and Bertrand rode after him as hard as hoofs could bear him. When I rose, there was the Sockman himself by my side, with the news that I was on his land, but with so many courteous words besides, and such gallant bearing, that he prevailed upon me to come to his house for shelter, there to wait until the page return. By the grace of the Virgin and the help of my patron Saint Magdalene, I stopped short ere I reached his door, though, as you saw, he strove to hale me up to it, and then, IHH. She shivered and chattered like one in an ague fit. What is it? Cried Alleyne, looking about in alarm. Nothing, friend, nothing. I was but thinking how I bit into his hand. Sooner would I bite living toad or poison snake. Oh, I shall loathe my lips forever. But you, how brave you were, and how quick, how meek for yourself, and how bold for a stranger. If I were a man, I should wish to do what you have done. It was a small thing, he answered, with a tingle of pleasure at these sweet words of praise. But you, what will you do? There is a great oak near here, and I think that Bertrand will bring the horses there, for it is an old hunting tryst of ours. Then hey for home, and no more hawking today. A 12-mile gallop will dry feet and skirt. But your father? Not one word shall I tell him. You do not know him, but I can tell you he is not a man to disobey as I have disobeyed him. He would avenge me. It is true, but it is not to him that I shall look for vengeance. Some day, perchance, in joust or in tourney, knight may wish to wear my colours, and then I shall tell him that if he does indeed crave my favour there is wrong unredressed, and the wronger the Sockman of Minstead. So my knight shall find a venture such as bold knights love, and my debt shall be paid, and my father none the wiser, and one rogue the less in the world. Say, is not that a brave plan? Nay, lady, it is a thought which is unworthy of you. How can such as you speak of violence and of vengeance? None to be gentle and kind, none to be piteous and forgiving? Alas, it is a hard, cruel world, and I would that I had never left my abbey cell. To hear such words from your lips is as though I heard an angel of grace preaching the devil's own creed. He had gone some way, lost in doubt and in self-reproach, his mind all tremulous with 1,000 new-found thoughts and fears and wonderments, when of a sudden there was a light rustle of the leaves behind him, and, glancing round, there was this graceful, swift-footed creature, treading in his very shadow, with a proud head bowed, even as his was, the picture of humility and repentance. I shall not vex you, nor even speak, she said, but I would fain keep with you while we are in the wood. Nay, you cannot vex me, he answered, all warm again at the very sight of her. It was my rough words which vex you, but I have been thrown among men all my life, and indeed, with all the will, I scarce know how to temper my speech to a lady's ear. Nay, I cannot do that, he answered gravely. There spoke your true self, said he, and you will find more pleasure in such forgiveness than in any vengeance. She shook her head, as if by no means assured of it, and then with a sudden little cry, which had more surprise than of joy in it, here is Bertrand with the horses. No, Bertrand, said she, thanks to this courteous stranger. And now, sir, she continued, springing into her saddle, it is not fit that I leave you without a word more. Clerk or no, you have acted this day as becomes a true knight. King Arthur and all his table could not have done more. It may be that, as some small return, my father or his kin may have power to advance your interest. He is not rich, but he is honored and of great friends. Tell me what is your purpose, and see if he may not aid it." "Alas, lady, I have now no purpose. I have but 2 friends in the world, and they have gone to Christchurch, where it is likely I shall join them." "And where is Christchurch?" "At the castle which is held by the brave knight, Sir Nigel Loing, constable to the Earl of Salisbury." To his surprise, she burst out laughing, and, spurring her palfrey, dashed off down the glade, with a page riding behind her. Not one word did she say, but as she vanished amid the trees, she half turned in her saddle and waved a last greeting. Long time he stood, half hoping that she might again come back to him, but the thud of the hoofs had died away, and there was no sound in all the woods but the gentle rustle and dropping of the leaves. At last he turned away and made his way back to the high road, another person from the light-hearted boy who had left it a short 3 hours before. Chapter 10. How Hordle John found a man whom he might follow, if he might not return to Beaulieu within the year, and if his brother's dogs were to be set upon him if he showed face upon Minstead land, then indeed he was adrift upon earth, north, south, east, and west. He might turn where he would, but all was equally chill and cheerless. The abbot had rolled 10 silver crowns in a lettuce leaf and hid them away in the bottom of his scrip, but that would be a sorry support for 12 long months. In all the darkness there was but the one bright spot of the sturdy comrades whom he had left that morning. If he could find them again, all would be well. The afternoon was not very advanced, for all that had befallen him. When a man is afoot at cockcrow, much may be done in the day. If he walked fast, he might yet overtake his friends ere they reached their destination. He pushed on, therefore, now walking and now running. As he journeyed, he bit into a crust which remained from his Beaulieu bread, and he washed it down by a draught from a woodland stream. It was no easy or light thing to journey through this great forest, which was some 20 miles from east to west, and a good 16 from Bramshaw Woods in the north to Lymington in the south. Alleyne, however, had the good fortune to fall in with a woodman, axe upon shoulder, trudging along in the very direction that he wished to go. With his guidance, he passed the fringe of Boulderwood Walk, famous for old ashen yew, through Markash with its giant beech trees, and on through the Knightwood groves, where the giant oak was already a great tree, but only one of many comely brothers. They plodded along together, the woodman and Alleyne, with little talk on either side, for their thoughts were as far asunder as the poles. Down this he pushed as fast as he might, hoping at every turn and rise to catch sight of his companions of the morning. From Vinny Ridge to Rhinefield Walk, the woods grow thick and dense up to the very edges of the track, but beyond the country opens up into broad, dun-coloured moors, flecked with clumps of trees, and topping each other in long, low curves up to the dark lines of forest in the furthest distance. Clouds of insects dance and buzz in the golden autumn light, and the air was full of the piping of the songbirds. Long, glinting dragonflies shot across the path, or hung tremulous with gauzy wings and gleaming bodies. There were folk, too, to be met upon the road, beggars and couriers, chapmen and tinkers, cheery fellows for the most part, with a rough jest and homely greeting for each other and for Alleyne. Near Shotwood he came upon 5 seamen, on their way from Poole to Southampton, rude red-faced men, who shouted at him in a jargon which he could scarce understand, and held out to him a great pot from which they had been drinking. Nor would they let him pass until he had dipped pannikin in and taken a mouthful, which set him coughing and choking, with the tears running down his cheeks. Further on he met a sturdy black-bearded man, mounted on a brown horse, with a rosary in his right hand and a long two-handed sword jangling against his stirrup iron. By his black robe and the 8-point cross upon his sleeve, Alleyne recognized him as one of the Knights Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem, whose presbytery was at Baddesley. He held up 2 fingers as he passed, with a Benedict, Phili M.I., whereat Alleyne doffed hat and bent knee, looking with much reverence at one who had devoted his life to the overthrow of the infidel. Poor simple lad! He had not learned yet that what men are and what men profess to be are very wide asunder, and that the Knights of St. John, having come into large part of the riches of the ill-fated Templars, were very much too comfortable to think of exchanging their palace for a tent, or the cellars of England for the thirsty deserts of Syria. Yet ignorance may be more precious than wisdom. For Alleyne, as he walked on, braced himself to a higher life by the thought of this other sacrifice, and strengthened himself by his example, which he could scarce have done had he known that the Hospitaler's mind ran more upon Malmsey than on Mamelukes, and on venison rather than victories. As he approached, he saw that they had 5 dried herrings laid out in front of them, with a great hunch of wheaten bread and a leathern flask full of milk. But instead of setting to it their food, they appeared to have forgot all about it, and were disputing together with flushed faces and angry gestures. It was easy to see by their dress and manner that they were 2 of those wandering students who formed about this time so enormous a multitude in every country in Europe. The one was long and thin, with melancholy features, while the other was fat and sleek, with a loud voice and the air of a man who is not to be gainsaid. Alas, Dickon, I fear that your logic is as bad as your philosophy or your divinity, and God wot it would be hard to say a worse word than that for it. For, hark ye, granting, propter argumentum, that I am a talker, then the true reasoning runs that since all men of sense should avoid me, and thou hast not avoided me, but art at the present moment eating herrings with me under a holly bush, ergo you are no man of sense, which is exactly what I have been dinning into your long ears ever since I first clapped eyes on your sunken chops. Tut, tut, cried the other. Your tongue goes like the clapper of a mill wheel. Sit down here, friend, and partake of this herring. Understand first, however, that there are certain conditions attached to it. I had hoped, said Alleyne, falling into the humor of the twain, that a tranquire of bread and a draught of milk might be attached to it. Hark to him, cried the little fat man. It is even thus, Dickon, wit, lad, is a catching thing, like the itch or the sweating sickness. I exude it round me. It is an aura. I tell you, cuz, that no man can come within 17 feet of me without catching a spark. Look at your own case. A duller man never stepped. And yet within the week you have said 3 things which might pass, and 1 thing the day we left Fordingbridge which I should not have been ashamed of myself. Enough, Rattlepate, enough, said the other. The milk you shall have, and the bread also, friend, together with the herring, but you must hold the scales between us. If he hold the herring, he holds the scales, my sapient brother, cried the fat man. But I pray you, good youth, to tell us whether you are a learned clerk, and, if so, whether you have studied at Oxenford or at Paris. I have some small stock of learning, Alleyne answered, picking at his herring, but I have been at neither of these places. I was bred amongst the Cistercian monks at Beaulieu Abbey. Pooh, pooh, they cried both together. What sort of an upbringing is that? Non quivus contingit adia Corinthum, quoth Alleyne. Come, brother Stephen, here's some tincture of letters, said the melancholy man more hopefully. He may be the better judge, since he hath no call to side with either of us. Now, attention, friend, and let your ears work as well as your nether jaw. Judex Damiter, you know the old saw. Here am I upholding the good fame of the learned Duns Scotus against the foolish quibblings and poor silly reasonings of Willie Ockham. While I, quoth the other loudly, do maintain the good sense and extraordinary wisdom of that most learned William against the crack-brained fantasies of the muddy Scotchman, who hath had such little wit as he is under so vast a pile of words, that it is like 1 drop of Gascony in a firkin of ditch water. Solomon his wisdom would not suffice to say what the rogue means. Certes, Stephen Hapgood, his wisdom doth not suffice, cried the other. It is as though a mole cried out against the morning star, because he could not see it. But our dispute, friend, is concerning the nature of that subtle essence which we call thought. For I hold with the learned Scotus that thought is in very truth a thing, even as vapor or fumes, or many other substances which our gross bodily eyes are blind to. For, look you, that which produces a thing must be itself a thing, and if a man's thought may produce a written book, then must thought itself be a material thing, even as the book is. Have I expressed it? Do I make it plain? Whereas I hold, shouted the other, with my revered preceptor, Doctor Preclaris et Excellentissimus, that all things are but thought, for when thought is gone I pry thee where the things then. Here are trees about us, and I see them because I think I see them, but if I have swooned, or sleep, or am in wine, then My thought having gone forth from me, lo, the trees go forth also. How now? 'Cause have I touched thee on the roll? Alleyne sat between them munching his bread, while the twain disputed across his knees, leaning forward with flushed faces and darting hands, in all the heat of argument. Never had he heard such jargon of scholastic philosophy, such fine-drawn distinctions, such crossfire of major and minor, proposition, syllogism, attack and refutation. Question clattered upon answer like a sword on a buckler. The ancients, the fathers of the church, the moderns, the scriptures, the Arabians, were each sent hurtling against the other, while the rain still dripped and the dark holly leaves glistened with the moisture. At last the fat man seemed to weary of it, for he set to work quietly upon his meal, while his opponent, as proud as the rooster who is left unchallenged upon the midden, crowed away in a last long burst of quotation and deduction. Suddenly, however, his eyes dropped upon his food, and he gave a howl of dismay. "You double thief," he cried, "you have eaten my herrings, and I without bite or sup since morning." "That," quoth the other complacently, "was my final argument, my crowning effort, or peroratio, as the orators have it. For, 'cause, since all thoughts are things, you have but to think a pair of herrings, and then conjure up a pottle of milk wherewith to wash them down." "A brave piece of reasoning," cried the other, "and I know but one reply to it." On which, leaning forward, he caught his comrade a rousing smack across his rosy cheek. "Nay, take it not amiss," he said, "since all things are but thoughts, then that also is but a thought and may be disregarded." This last argument, however, by no means commended itself to the pupil of Occam, who plucked a great stick from the ground and signified his dissent by smiting the realist over the pate with it. By good fortune, the wood was so light and rotten that it went to 1,000 splinters, but Alleyne thought it best to leave the twain to settle the matter at their leisure, the more so as the sun was shining brightly once more. Looking back down the pool-strewn road, he saw the two excited philosophers waving their hands and shouting at each other, but their babble soon became a mere drone in the distance, and a turn in the road hid them from his sight. And now, after passing Holmesley Walk and the Wootton Heath, the forest began to shred out into scattered belts of trees, with gleam of cornfield and stretch of pasture land between. Here and there by the wayside stood little knots of wattle and daub huts with shock-haired laborious lounging by the doors and red-cheeked children sprawling in the roadway. Back among the groves he could see the high gable ends and thatched roofs of the Franklins' houses, on whose fields these men found employment. Or more often a thick dark column of smoke marked their position and hinted at the coarse plenty within. By these signs Alleyne knew that he was on the very fringe of the forest, and therefore no great way from Christchurch. The sun was lying low in the west and shooting its level rays across the long sweep of rich green country, glinting on the white fleeced sheep, and throwing long shadows from the red kine who waded knee-deep in the juicy clover. Right glad was the traveller to see the high tower of Christchurch Priory gleaming in the mellow evening light, and gladder still when, on rounding a corner, he came upon his comrades of the morning seated astraddle upon a fallen tree. They had a flat space before them, on which they alternately threw little square pieces of bone, and were so intent upon their occupation that they never raised eye as he approached them. He observed with astonishment, as he drew near, that the archer's bow was on John's back, the archer's sword by John's side, and the steel cap laid upon the tree trunk between them. "Mort de Marvaille," Aylward shouted, looking down at the dice. "Never had I such cursed luck. A murrain on the bones. I have not thrown a good main since I left Navarre. A 1 and a 3. En avant, camarade." "Us come to stop," cried the bowman, patting Alleyne all over in his delight. "Shall not get away from us again." "I wish no better," said he, with a pringling in the eyes at this hearty greeting. "Well said, lad," cried Big John. "We three shall to the wars together, and the devil may fly away with the abbot of Beaulieu, but your feet and hosen are all besmudged. Us being in the water, or I am the more mistaken." "I have in good sooth," Alleyne answered, and then as they journeyed on their way he told them the many things that had befallen him, his meeting with the Verlaine, his sight of the king, his coming upon his brother, with all the tale of the black welcome and of the fair damsel. They strode on either side, each with an ear slanting towards him, But ere he had come to the end of his story, the bowman had spun round upon his heel, and was hastening back the way they had come, breathing loudly through his nose. "What then?" asked Alleyne, trotting after him and gripping at his jerkin. "I am back from Minstead, lad, to thrust a handful of steel into the sockman. What? Hail a demoiselle against her will, and then loose dogs at his own brother. Let me go." "Nenny, Nenny," cried Alleyne, laughing. There was no scath done. "Come back, friend." And so, by mingled pushing and entreaties, they got his head round for Christchurch once more. Yet he walked with his chin upon his shoulder, until, catching sight of a maiden by a wayside well, the smiles came back to his face and peace to his heart. It is a game which friend Aylward have been teaching of me. "Take them back, man, and never heed the pay," said John. "I did but wish to learn the feel of them, since I am like to have such trinkets hung to my own girdle for some years to come." "Mal of I, he was born for a free companion," cried Aylward. He had the very trick of speech and turn of thought. "I take them back then, and indeed it gives me unease not to feel my yew-stave tapping against my leg bone. But see, Miss Garcon's, on this side of the church rises the square and darkling tower of Earl Salisbury's castle, and even from here I seem to see on yonder banner the red roebuck of the Montacutes." "Red upon white," said Alleyne, shading his eyes, "but whether roebuck or no is more than I could vouch. How black is the great tower, and how bright the gleam of arms upon the wall. See below the flag, how it twinkles like a star." "Aye, it is the steel headpiece of the watchman," remarked the archer. "But we must on, if we are to be there before the drawbridge rises at the vespers bugle, for it is likely that Sir Nigel, being so renowned a soldier, may keep hard discipline within the walls, and let no man enter after sundown." So saying, he quickened his pace, and the three comrades were soon close to the straggling and broad-spread town which centred round the noble church in the frowning castle. It chanced on that very evening that Sir Nigel Loring, having supped before sunset, as was his custom, and having himself seen at Palmer's and Cadsand, his 2 war horses, with the 13 hacks, the 5 jennets, my lady's 3 palfreys, and the great dapple-grey Roussan, had all their needs supplied, had taken his dogs for an evening breather. 60 or 70 of them, large and small, smooth and shaggy, deerhound, boarhound, bloodhound, wolfhound, mastiff, Alorn, Talbot, lurcher, terrier, spaniel, snapping, yelling, and whining, with score of lolling tongues and waving tails, came surging down the narrow lane which leads from the Twynham kennels to the bank of Avon. 2 russet-clad varlets, with loud halloo and cracking whips, walked thigh-deep amid the swarm, guiding, controlling, and urging. Behind came Sir Nigel himself, with Lady Loring upon his arm, the pair walking slowly and sedately, as befitted both their age and their condition, while they watched with a smile in their eyes the scrambling crowd in front of them. They paused, however, at the bridge, and, leaning their elbows upon the stonework, they stood looking down at their own faces in the glassy stream, and at the swift flash of speckled trout against the tawny gravel. Sir Nigel was a slight man of poor stature, with soft lisping voice and gentle ways. So short was he that his wife, who was no very tall woman, had the better of him by the breadth of 3 fingers. His sight having been injured in his early wars by a basketful of lime which had been emptied over him when he led the Earl of Derby's stormers up the breach of Bergerac, he had contracted something of a stoop, with a blinking, peering expression of face. His age was 46, but the constant practice of arms, together with a cleanly life, had preserved his activity and endurance unimpaired, so that from a distance he seemed to have the slight limbs and swift grace of a boy. His coat hardie, or tunic, and trunk hosen were of a purple plum colour, with long weepers which hung from either sleeve to below his knees. His shoes were of red leather, daintily pointed at the toes, but not yet prolonged to the extravagant lengths which the succeeding reign was to bring into fashion. A gold-embroidered belt of knighthood encircled his loins. With his arms, 5 roses gules on a field argent, cunningly worked upon the clasp. So stood Sir Nigel Loring upon the bridge of Avon, and talked lightly with his lady. And, certes, had the 2 visages alone been seen, and the stranger being asked which were the more likely to belong to the bold warrior whose name was loved by the roughest soldiery of Europe, he had assuredly selected the lady's. Her face was large and square and red, with face, thick brows, and the eyes of one who was accustomed to rule. Taller and broader than her husband, her flowing gown of sendal and fur-lined tippet could not conceal the gaunt and ungraceful outlines of her figure. It was the age of martial women. The deeds of Black Agnes of Dunbar, of Lady Salisbury, and of the Countess of Montfort were still fresh in the public minds. "True, my sweet bird, true," answered the knight, picking a comfort from his gold drawer. "The maid is like the young filly, which kicks heels and plunges for very lust of life. Give her time, dame, give her time. Well, I know that my father would have given me, not time, but a good hazel stick across my shoulders. However, I know not what the world is coming to, when young maids may flout their elders. I wonder that you do not correct her, my fair lord." "And so would I, since you would have been the nearer me my own. But I doubt not that you are right, and that Maud's wings need clipping, which I may leave in your hands when I am gone. For, in sooth, this peaceful life is not for me, and were it not for your gracious kindness and loving care, I could not abide it a week. I hear that there is talk of warlike muster at Bordeaux once more, and by St. Paul, it would be a new thing if the lions of England and the red pile of Chandos were to be seen in the field, and the roses of Loing were not waving by their side. My lady, when our liege lord, the king, at 80 years, and my lord Chandos at 80, are blithe and ready to lay lance and rest for England's cause, it would beseem me to prate of service done. It is sooth that I have received 27 wounds. There is the more reason that I should be thankful that I am still long of breath and sound in limb. I have also seen some bickering and scuffling. 6 great land battles I count, with 4 upon sea, and 57 on foals, skirmishes and bushments. I have held 22 towns, and I have been at the intaking of 31. Surely then it would be bitter shame to me, and also to you, since my fame is yours, that I should now hold back if a man's work is to be done. Besides, bethink you how low is our purse, with bailiff and reeve ever croaking of empty farms and wasting lands. Were it not for this constableship which the Earl of Salisbury bestowed upon us, we could scarce uphold the state which is fitting to our degree. Therefore, my sweeting, there is the more need that I should turn to where there is good pay to be earned and brave ransoms to be won." "Ah, my dear lord," quoth she, with sad, weary eyes, "I thought that at last I had you to mine own self, even though your youth had been spent afar from my side. Yet my voice, as I know well, should speed you unto glory and renown, not hold you back when fame is to be won. Yet what can I say? For all men know that your valor needs a curb and not the spur. It goes to my heart that you should ride forth now a mere knight bachelor, when there is no noble in the land who has so good a claim to the square pennon, save only that you have not the money to uphold it." "And whose fault that, my sweet bird?" said he. "No fault, my fair lord, but a virtue. For how many rich ransoms have you won, and yet have scattered the crowns among page and archer and varlet, until in a week you had not as much as would buy food and forage. It is a most knightly largesse, and yet withouten money how can man rise?" "Dirt and dross," cried he, "what matter rise or fall, so that duty be done and honour gained. Banneret or bachelor, square pennon or forked, I would not give a denier for the difference, and the less since Sir John Chandos, chosen flower of English chivalry, is himself but a humble knight. But meanwhile fret not thyself, my heart's dove, for it is likely there may be no war waged, and we must await the news. But here are 3 strangers, and one, as I take it, a soldier fresh from service. It is likely that he may give us word of what is stirring over the water." Lady Loing, glancing up, saw in the fading light 3 companions walking abreast down the road, all grey with dust and stained with travel, yet chattering merrily between themselves. He in the midst was young and comely, with boyish open face and bright grey eyes, which glanced from right to left as though he found the world around him both new and pleasing. To his right walked a huge red-headed man, with broad smile and merry twinkle, whose clothes seemed to be bursting and splitting at every seam, as though he was some lusty chick who was breaking bravely from his shell. On the other side, with his knotted hand upon the young man's shoulder, came a stout and burly archer, brown and fierce-eyed, with sword at belt and long yellow yew-stave peeping over his shoulder. Hard face, battered headpiece, dinted brigandine, with faded red line of St. George ramping on a discolored ground, all proclaimed as plainly as words that he was indeed from the land of war. He looked keenly at Sir Nigel as he approached, and then, plunging his hand under his breastplate, he stepped up to him with a rough, uncouth bow to the lady. "Your pardon, fair sir," said he, "but I know you the moment I clap eyes on you, though in sooth I have seen you oftener in steel than in velvet. I have drawn string beside you at La Rushdierin, Romorantin, Maupertuis, Nogent, Ori, and other places. Then, good archer, I am right glad to welcome you to Twynham Castle, and in the steward's room you will find provant for yourself and comrades. To me also your face is known, though mine eyes play such tricks with me that I can scarce be sure of my own squire. Rest a while, and you shall come to the hall anon and tell us what is passing in France, for I have heard that it is likely that our pennons may flutter to the south of the great Spanish mountains ere another year be past." "There was talk of it in Bordeaux," answered the archer, "and I saw myself that the armourers and smiths were as busy as rats in a wheat rick. But I bring you this letter from the valiant Gascon knight, Sir Claude Latier, and to you, lady," he added after a pause, "I bring from him this box of red sugar of Narbonne, with every courteous and knightly greeting which a gallant cavalier may make to a fair and noble dame." This little speech had cost the blunt bowman much pains and planning, but he might have spared his breath, for the lady was quite as much absorbed as the lord in the letter, which they held between them, a hand on either corner, spelling it out very slowly, with drawn brows and muttering lips. As they read it, Alleyne, who stood with Hordle John a few paces back from their comrade, saw the lady catch a breath, while the knight laughed softly to himself. "You see, dear heart," said he, "that they will not leave the old dog in his kennel when the game is afoot. And what of this white company? Archer?" "Ow, sir, you speak of dogs," cried Aylward, "but they are a pack of lusty hounds who are ready for any quarry, if they are but good huntsmen to halloo them on. Sir, we have been in the wars together, and I have seen many a brave following, but never such a set of woodland boys as this. They do but want you at their head, and who will bar the way to them?" "Pad you," said Sir Nigel. "If they are all like their messenger, they are indeed men of whom a leader may be proud. Your name, good archer?" "Sam Aylward, sir, of the 100 of Easebourne and the Rape of Chichester." "And this giant behind you?" "He is Big John of Hordle, a forest man, who hath now taken service in the company." "A proper figure of a man-at-arms," said the little knight. "Why, man, you are no chicken. Ye are warring him the stronger man. See to that great stone from the coping which hath fallen upon the bridge. For my lazy varlet strove this day to carry it hence. I would that you too could put them to shame by budging it, though I fear that I overtask you, for it is of a grievous weight." He pointed as he spoke to a huge rough-hewn block which lay by the roadside, deep sunken from its own weight in the reddish earth. The archer approached it, rolling back the sleeves of his jerkin, but with no very hopeful countenance, for indeed it was a mighty rock. John, however, put him aside with his left hand, and, stooping over the stone, he plucked it single-handed from its soft bed and swung it far into the stream. There it fell with mighty splash, one jagged end peeking out above the surface, while the waters bubbled and foamed with far-circling eddy. "Good leck," cried Sir Nigel, and "good leck," cried his lady, while John stood laughing and wiping the caked dirt from his fingers. "I have felt his arms round my ribs," said the bowman, "and they crackle yet at the thought of it. This other comrade of mine is a right learned clerk, for all that he is so young. Hight Alleyne, the son of Edric, brother to the Suckman of Minstead." "I would fain to France with my friends here," Alleyne answered, "but I am a man of peace, a reader, exorcist, acolyte, and clerk." "It is well to have a learned clerk in every troop," said Sir Nigel. "By St. Paul, They are men so caitiff that they think more of a scrivener's pen than of a lady's smile, and do their devoir in hopes that they may fill a line in a chronicle or make a tag to a jongleure's romance. I remember well that, at the siege of Redders, there was a little, sleek, fat clerk of the name of Chaucer, who was so apt at rundle, servant, or tunson, that no man dare give back a foot from the walls, lest he find it all set down in his rhymes and sung by every underling and varlet in the camp. But, my soul's bode, you hear me prate as though all were decided, when I have not yet taken counsel either with you or with my lady mother. Let us to the chamber, while these strangers find such fare as pantry and cellar may furnish. The night air strikes chill, said the lady, and turned down the road with her hand upon her lord's arm. The three comrades dropped behind and followed, Aylward much the lighter for having accomplished his mission, Alleyne full of wonderment at the humble bearing of so renowned a captain, and John loud with snorts and sneers, which spoke his disappointment and contempt. "What ails the man?" asked Aylward in surprise. "I have been cozened and bejaped," quoth he gruffly. "By thee, Sir Balaam the false prophet." "By my hilt," cried the archer, "though I be not Balaam, yet I hold converse with the very creature that spake to him. What is amiss, then, and how have I played you false?" It sent the blood cold through Alleyne's veins to see that as they came together, the man and the beast, the creature reared up with eyes ablaze with fear and hate, and whirled its great paws above the knight to smite him to the earth. He, however, blinking with puckered eyes, reached up his kerchief and flicked the beast twice across the snout with it. "Ah, saucy, saucy," quoth he, with gentle chiding, on which the bay, uncertain and puzzled, dropped its 4 legs to earth again, and, waddling back, was soon swathed in ropes by the bearward and a crowd of peasants who had been in close pursuit. A scared man was the keeper, for, having chained the brute to a stake while he drank a stoup of ale at the inn, it had been baited by stray curs, until, in wrath and madness, it had plucked loose the chain and smitten or bitten all who came in its path. Most scared of all was he to find that the creature had come nigh to harm the lord and lady of the castle, who had power to place him in the stretch neck or to have the skin scourged from his shoulders. Yet, when he came with bowed head and humble entreaty for forgiveness, he was met with a handful of small silver from Sir Nigel, whose dame, however, was less charitably disposed, being much ruffled in her dignity by the manner in which he had been hustled from her lord's side. "I must crave your pardon, comrade," said he, bluntly. "I was a fool not to know that a little rooster may be the gamest. I believe that this man is indeed a leader whom we may follow."